He's immensely seductive. Quite sure he's right. Obsessionally neurotic. Pretty dangerous, in fact.
Let us never tolerate outrageous conspiracy theories.
Do you mean you doubt your powers to convince him?
Say it! Say it!
All right, I'll say it.
Worse than that. What I'm afraid of is his power to convince me.
We're talking about putting a manifestly irresponsible man on national television.
Sweetheart, be reasonable.
What? This is the end game.
All right, everybody. It is Monday, June 2nd, 2025, the 134th day of the Golden Age. I'm your moderator, Chris Paul. Let's be reasonable. Apologies for the lack of an update on the week's schedule. I had that all typed up on Substack. It was ready to go out. And for whatever reason, the Substack platform moved me to working offline, which means that you're not actually able to send the things out. And so that was a bit annoying. And so I'm sorry that I wasn't able to do that. The other piece of relevant information in that post, or would-be post, was that on Wednesday afternoon at 3 p.m. Eastern, rather than the regular show, I'm going to be interviewing a man named Konstantin von Hofmeister. Sorry. He is the editor-in-chief of the Arctos Journal, and he wrote a book called Multipolarity, among other books. And the foreword for that book is by Alexander Dugin, who is kind of the Steve Bannon of Russia, you could say. I'm really looking forward to that. We're going to be streaming that here and on Badlands. And we're going to talk for a good long time. So I think that that'll be really interesting. We're going to discuss multipolarity. We're going to discuss how things are in Europe. Probably get into some good twin, evil twin stuff, because I don't think that while he's in touch with the concepts, I'm not sure that he's framed it that way before. So I'm going to be interested to hear his reaction there. And then potentially Thursday evening, I'm going to try to do another normal stream, perhaps a subscriber stream, and probably at like 5 p.m. And I'm not 100% sure I'm going to be able to do that. But as I said last week, I have some family coming into town on Friday. And so Friday afternoon is probably out for me. But if it's not, then maybe I'll just do that. Okay. So without any further ado, let's talk about some of the events of the weekend. And honestly, it wasn't like that much happened. We had a post by Trump that caused some controversy. And then supposedly Ukraine has launched an audacious attack against Russia. And so we'll get into that. We also had a Polish election, the follow-up, the runoff from the election we discussed a couple of weeks ago. And that went the way that we expected it to go. So we'll get to that. But let's start with Joe Biden and his clones. The mainstream media was back to their first term form in this one, worrying about Donald Trump spreading those nasty conspiracy theories again. This is the New York Times from Sunday. Trump amplifies another outlandish conspiracy theory. Biden is a robotic clone. President Trump shared an outlandish conspiracy theory on social media Saturday night, saying former President Joseph R. Biden had been executed in 2020 and replaced by a robotic clone. The latest example of the president amplifying false material to his millions of followers. Let's go ahead and we'll look at the post itself, and then we'll come back to the coverage in the Times. Truth Social was actually giving me problems today, too. I don't know what was going on with my normal platforms, but something was up. It is no longer up. So here you have it, the post from Donald Trump on Saturday evening. He simply copied the link to a post he saw on Truth Social and then posted that link and nothing more. No comments. It wasn't technically a repost, although it serves the same function. Let's look at the post itself. So you have Donald Trump there throwing up the peace sign or victory formation or ordering 2 Diet Cokes. It's hard to know. This is the original post. It's a mess. This is actually, the picture there was the profile picture of this account. And this account now has almost 6,500 followers. You can imagine a lot of that flooded in this weekend after Donald Trump highlighting the account. But the post says there is no hashtag Joe Biden executed in 2020. Hashtag Biden clones, doubles, and robotic engineered, soulless, mindless entities are what you see. Hashtag Democrats don't know the difference. And then the amount of tags and hashtags that were added to this post is rather extraordinary. Steel, U.S. Steel, MAGA, Maha, Democrats. It goes on and on. Children, veterans, Christian, Jewish, media, economy, students, school. They tag CPAC, the House GOP, Team Kennedy, Real Latinos with Trump, the Christian Patriots. You can just go down all these random accounts. Some of these are prominent MAGA accounts. Some of them are accounts probably most of us have never heard of. It's difficult to know what any of that means or is for. Maybe the poster just wanted this post to be highlighted. It was in response to a post from the Babylon Bee that said, Biden family worried they may be running out of time to exploit Joe Biden's health. Okay, so that was posted on Saturday afternoon, and then Trump came and dropped this on Saturday night. So what in the world do we make of that? Oh, man, you know what I did? It opened. It's so funny because, we were doing this on Devolution Power Hour on Saturday night, and the same thing happened to John, and I did not think of it. So there is the post itself, and I'll just leave that up. So clones, doubles, robots, anything is possible. Just want to be clear that everyone understands that I understand that anything is possible. Okay? I certainly do understand that. The clones seems a little less likely to me, but it's, again, I'm not going to say it's not possible. Totally possible. I believe that's totally possible. I don't necessarily think it's likely, but I believe it's totally possible. The doubles thing is undeniable. We've seen Joe Biden doubles before. We've seen Joe Biden doubles going and getting into Ubers on their own, and not like the black car Uber, just an Uber during his quote unquote presidency, which was fake. And despite its fakeness, was also illegitimate. So we've got that. In terms of robots, that seems kind of unlikely, but you never know. Soulless, mindless, and what was the other word? Yeah. Robotic engineered, soulless, mindless entities are what you see. Clones, doubles, and robotic engineered, soulless, mindless entities is what you see. Well, was Biden soulless and mindless? I guess we can just give this poster a thumbs up for that. I'm with him there. What about clones and doubles and robotic engineered entities? I don't know. And I understand that it is a lot of fun to speculate about these things, and I am perfectly happy to engage in exactly that sort of speculation because it's fun and because there are some mysterious things happening in our world right now that we would have totally ignored 5, 10, 20 years ago or more. At least I would have. You know, maybe you've been awake for far longer than I would have, than I have been. But still, even for a general awakeness, right? Someone who understands that there is actually a system controlling things, that our world is not as we imagine it, someone who has kind of dealt with the inevitable battle between science and faith, the worldly and the godly, for instance, the centralization versus the decentralization. Understanding these concepts is critical. And even once you do that, there's some stuff going on that blows our minds on a fairly regular basis right now. And some of that stuff, you know, to the extent that General Quast was being forthcoming in how he was describing quantum computing and some of the other technological inventions or, I guess, developments that we're going to see in our near future, assuming that's true, that's going to blow our minds in a whole new way. And we've been talking over the last couple of weeks about the mystery of our physical being, what our physical reality is actually made up of, and whether or not we might have gotten it wrong or been convinced it was something other than it is. I think we have to allow for all of these things, all of these possibilities, because we are in a mysterious space. And people who have a lot of confidence in the way things are, a lot of those people don't seem to be very awake. They still believe whatever's on the television. They still believe that the results of our elections are legitimate and that those leaders should then be allowed to rule us as a result of those elections, while also knowing them to be fake. So I can't get on board with that level of certainty that there's nothing else weird going on with Joe Biden, that is just Joe Biden, the original Joe Biden, the only Joe Biden with some surgery. That's a lot, okay? There's a lot of weird things about Joe Biden. Joe Biden looks weird. Joe Biden doesn't look like the old Joe Biden. I'm not saying that can't happen. I'm just saying you got to trust your eyes a little bit too. And the guy now ain't the guy then. So I leave myself open to the possibilities. By the way, I don't want to divert us too much, but it is important to recognize that in terms of new faces, Una Panuna seems to have one. That's her on Fox News on Friday. There she is, Una Panuna Banca, looking like someone other than Una Panuna Banca. And so I don't know what to do about that. And hey, people have their theories on that. All I can say is Una Panuna Banca. Had to get one in. Okay, so let's go back to this New York Times article just for a minute here. Let me pull up my notes because the highlights don't seem to be there. Who would have ever guessed it? So let's skip down. Mr. Trump has long had a penchant for sharing debunked or baseless theories online, but his embrace of conspiracies is not limited to social media. He has also elevated false claims inside the White House and surrounded himself with cabinet officials promoting such theories. Last month, while sitting next to the president of South Africa in the Oval Office, Mr. Trump claimed that white South African farmers were victims of mass killings and displayed an image intended to back up his assertion. The image was actually of the conflict in eastern Congo. Mr. Trump has falsely asserted that white South Africans are victims of genocide, even though police statistics do not show that white people in the nation are any more vulnerable than other groups. Well, that's interesting. Why don't they care about those statistics when they show that Black Americans aren't being targeted by police? Just have to wonder. Also, that is a very bad proof that genocide is not happening. Oh, so the government's own security apparatus isn't disagreeing with the government about whether or not genocide's happening? That would not be shocking. But baseless claims, evidence-free. We're going to get into some of that a little later on as well. One more little section here. I think there was one more. Yes. A New York Times analysis of thousands of Mr. Trump's social media posts and reposts over a 6-month period in 2024 found that at least 330 of them described both a false, secretive plot against Mr. Trump or the American people and a specific entity supposedly responsible for it. Okay, good. They included suggestions that the FBI had ordered his assassination and that accusations that government officials had orchestrated the Capitol riot on January 6, 2021. Well, that seems pretty likely. And I don't know if orchestrated the riot is the right way to say that when we're talking about the involvement of government officials, but orchestrating the riot could be informants or assets of the law enforcement or intel community. Some of them definitely had a hand in orchestrating the violence to the extent that that event broadly was a violent event. And of course, it wasn't, except in the area where all the cameras were. And I would suggest anybody check out the Woo's News videos on YouTube about January 6th. If you've never looked into the staging of the so-called violence on January 6th, I would highly recommend Woo's News, WOOZ News on YouTube. Mr. Trump's repost of the robot conspiracy theory came a day after Mr. Biden told reporters that he was feeling good after beginning treatment for an aggressive form of prostate cancer. Mr. Trump has suggested that Biden's diagnosis last month was not new and had been concealed from the public. Yes, Mr. Trump is not the only person who's suggested that. Everyone with a brain and eyes who has seen Biden talk about his cancer before or knows how these things come to be and come to be known and how long in advance Biden would have known about it before it reached this stage, all of those people also believe that to the extent there is prostate cancer, it happened before. Now, what's going on here? That's the real question. So Trump posts this a day after Biden's saying he's feeling good, in no danger of dying soon, especially not 1 week from now. No danger whatsoever of dying. And again, we don't know when this is going to happen. I'm not wishing ill on Joe Biden or whatever that is. I'm just saying when distractions are needed, one of the best distractions the regime uses is a state funeral. And so I can imagine that the desire for a state funeral is probably pretty strong. So we have that element, all right? Joe Biden is in the later stages of his life. He could die at any time, but he says he's feeling good. So the regime uses his death as to create a state funeral and a major distraction. Well, one way that people would be less inclined to pay attention to something like that is if Joe Biden had actually been executed in 2020. And you could imagine then that the playbook was playing out regardless, because the playbooks always play out regardless. The reality doesn't matter. The playbook's going to play out. The stories are going to be communicated to the public. And then it's just a matter of whether or not the public believes those stories and then helps construct a reality around it. Okay. So was Biden executed in 2020? Well, we have no proof of that. And we have no way to prove that. Okay. At least not right now. We could make assumptions. We could think about different story elements, different things we've seen that might lead us to that suggestion, but we can't prove it and we don't have proof of it ultimately. Okay. There's nobody, as far as I'm aware of, who has proof of that, except insofar as it would be at the Trump level or at the military level. And if something like that were to happen in our country, why wouldn't it have played out in front of the public in a normal court proceeding? Well, there are plenty of good reasons why it wouldn't have played out that way, especially if we're working toward what I believe we're working toward, which is the Rico Grande framing, that construct where all of the elements of the regime are gone after legally at the same time as a coordinated criminal enterprise, the enterprise being formed to commit these crimes, including the overthrow of the United States of America, our rigged and stolen elections, all the things they've done to the people, atrocities committed around the world, violations of Americans' constitutional rights and human rights, et cetera. All that has to be punished at some point. One way that it would never get punished properly is if each and every person were tried in our courts in a totally normal way, in a totally normal length of time, with the appeals and the rest of those processes. We would never get anywhere. We're talking about thousands, if not tens of thousands, if not hundreds of thousands of people swept up in this global criminal conspiracy, this criminal enterprise. And so it can't possibly be that we're just going to work our way through the lower levels and finally reach the big fish. I mean, we've seen through the Durham investigations, those were productive in terms of getting the evidentiary record out into the public and on the record in courts that have dealt with the evidence. I think all that's going to be important at a later stage, but we didn't get major indictments and we did not get major convictions, and we do not have the people responsible for the Russia hoax, for instance, rotting in prison as they should be. Okay. Because that was treason against the country. That was obviously a usurpation of our constitutional system to the extent that we still had it, because it was truthfully usurped 160 years ago, if not earlier. Okay, so is it possible? Is it possible that Joe Biden was taken to Gitmo and executed after a military tribunal? Yes, it's possible, okay? I think it's actually more probable than clones, but not more probable than doubles, which of course we know to be true. So I don't know. Small possibility? Big possibility? I don't know. It seems like it's a small possibility, but we got to stay open. There's a lot of stuff we don't know. So would it have been proper then to have a trial and an execution of a figure of that stature without the public knowing about it? And not only without the public knowing about it, but then with an orchestrated campaign to prove to the public that not only is that guy alive, he's running for president, he's winning the election, he's becoming president, and then he is working as the chief executive and commander-in-chief of the United States government and military. That's an awfully complex thing to have orchestrated. Is it possible? Of course it's possible. Is it likely? Man, I don't know. Everybody's just going to have to decide that one for themselves. So it's possible that Biden was executed and that he's not alive. And at the end of this long process, as I laid out a few weeks ago when we went back through the Joe Biden as fall guy scenario that I presented in late 2020, it's entirely possible that all of this was scripted and scheduled, and they want to give Joe Biden this nice, easy exit off stage, and then they'll just end Joe Biden's life and people can't even be mean to him anymore. That seems like the goal always for the regime. It's the perfect vessel. Joe Biden would be the perfect vessel to take on all the responsibility for the regime's corruption for 50, 60 years of American government corruption, in addition to everything on the Hunter Biden laptop, in addition to everything he was seen to be doing during his fake and illegitimate presidency, all of it. Pack that all into the vessel. Joe Biden's gone now. He got embarrassed on a national stage last year because of his dementia. And now we've got some books about him coming out saying finally, yes, it's dementia. Meanwhile, Trump saying, actually, Joe Biden wasn't even president. It was just Joe Biden's auto pen and a shadow government of communists making all the decisions that would then get Joe Biden's pen, his auto pen, signing off on all these decisions without any knowledge from a quote unquote president. It may not have been a president. Was it all a show? It could have been. I don't know that it was. We can't only analyze it as though it is, right? Because the lines between fiction and reality are so blurry. So we want to understand what's happening on both sides of that line and then just leave it be so that we can see how reality emerges in our world and which interpretation maps onto that reality, which interpretation makes sense. It's just a different approach to attempting to understand the world rather than the one that the sleeping mind engages, which is to figure out what the authoritative source is saying and then try to take some perfect understanding of that away. And that understanding, of course, also matches a person's personal biases. And then they identify themselves with that position and then fight to defend that position. Well, that's senseless. Okay. It leaves out the possibility that something other than the belief you have now taken on from authority could be true, and something else could be true. Okay. I mentioned this to John the other night. I think it's important to mention here. I was thinking about this over the weekend because, of course, I'm trying to write a book right now. And among the topics I'm going to cover in that book extensively are the controlled opposition dynamic, of course. Okay. So the sleeping mind, and I can say this from personal experience, and I'm guessing that many of you have had this experience as well, is that you will be presented the two sides of the story, the two general sides of the story. You'll have the MSNBC version, you'll have the Fox News version. And if you average those versions out, assuming that this is true but biased, and this is also true but biased, what you're trying to do then is not judge the truth of the underlying stories. You're not trying to determine whether the underlying story maps onto any discernible reality from reality prime. You're just trying to adjust for the bias from all of these various sides and then find some approximation in the middle and determine that that's the truth. Well, there's absolutely no reason to believe that's the case. Okay. We see that dynamic with our two-party system, which is really just a uniparty. Democrat and Republican. Well, I don't agree with the Democrats and I don't agree with the Republicans. And I know both sides have their biases and blah, blah, blah. And I don't identify with those. So what I'm going to be is a centrist so that I can say some of those things are right and some of those things are right. And I guess I'll just determine each and every go round what the right thing to do is based on whatever my options are and whatever the television makes me feel about myself relative to this belief. Okay. That's madness. All of that should be done away with. The answer does not have to be between the two opposite ends in the controlled opposition dynamic, and there's a very good chance it's not there. Okay? So we have to be able to move outside of that and understand the controlled opposition dynamic for what it is and seek the truth elsewhere while understanding that that is relevant because it's still a story that's existing in our world and being believed by people who will then act in ways that are responsive to that story. Okay. And so we have to be accounting for those things, even if we're not settling in on a belief that's within that controlled opposition dynamic. All right. So let's bring it back to Biden and whether or not he's dead. The regime wants a state funeral that serves as a distraction, an honoring of the old regime to cover up the regime that's there now, the administration that's there now, Donald Trump, in whatever capacity all of that exists. Okay. They're going to show their perfect, wonderful thing compared to this truly awful thing. And the funny thing is, in 50 or 100 years, assuming that these were to happen at the same time, and I know they might not, I understand that. But if it just so happened that the state funeral, Joe Biden was lying in state and they were doing the funeral proceedings, the day before, for instance, the 250th birthday party begins on June 14th, 12 days from now. Not this coming Saturday, the Saturday after. The big military parade and the rest of it. Well, we know that fake news is future history. If we start seeing articles about Joe Biden's state funeral being the cause of this parade, this parade, it's a military parade, but it has other reasons. And the true purpose of this parade and what we should really feel good about is the celebration of the life of a great American, Joe Biden. I can totally see that playing out. And to ruin narrative efforts like that, things like this work awfully well. If it's just the case that there is not a Joe Biden and that we were shown actors in masks or body doubles or AI renderings, which, by the way, I think we can all admit right now, we couldn't actually tell, okay? We don't know Joe Biden. Joe Biden is on TV. Joe Biden's a TV character. That's the extent to which we know Joe Biden, okay? But then we see him with the women on The View, and like they can't be tied into the program too, right? Like they can't all just be faking and interacting with a body double or an actor in a mask, or certainly not an AI agent. Or so we think. It's hard to say. I'm not suggesting that's what it is. Again, I think it's probably a low probability possibility. But this stuff can't just be dismissed. Now, on the other hand, I don't believe that Donald Trump, through these posts, is just saying to everyone, hey, you didn't know this, but Joe Biden was executed in 2020. Could he have been? Maybe. I know a lot of people think he was. Don't know how smart that is. A lot of people really base a lot of their analysis and interpretation about what's going on in the real world on their understanding that these people were executed in military tribunals years ago. That's awfully bold. I'm not prepared to go there. I am prepared to believe it if that's what happens, okay? Which is the point of keeping your mind open. But it's not the sort of belief we can just go out and found other beliefs on, right? There's no foundation there, okay? It's a suspicion. It's a speculation. It's possible, maybe a low probability possibility, but it's possible. So we keep our minds open to it. But you can't go hook, line, and sinker on Joe Biden was executed in 2020. And Trump just told us that on his Truth Social post. Trump posts a lot of stuff on Truth Social. Sometimes they are statements that carry the full authority of the presidency. And we have to recognize that. And sometimes he's reposting the worst memes anyone's ever seen. And actually, while we're on the subject, let's just take a look at this. I'm just going to select a Donald Trump post on Truth Social to see what the response section is like. And so this is going to be a little random, and we can test my theory. Maybe it won't work in this exact instance. Here's a Trump was right about everything. Okay, let's just do this one. Now, is Trump saying that he was right about every single thing? Well, he's been right about a lot of things. Right about everything? Maybe at some point. But also wrong about most of those things at some point too, which is okay. But, I mean, we can't just take a literal interpretation of everything just because Trump posted it. We can consider a literal interpretation, but that should probably be about it. So, when we go through a reply section in a Donald Trump Truth Social post, what we get are often really terrible memes begging for Donald Trump to retweet them, and they end up at the top of the reply section at all times. And this is one of the ones that this blocked account is one of the ones that does it so often that I couldn't deal with it anymore. So I blocked it. But you see these replies over and over again. These are the ones that go to the top. Another ridiculous meme, more of a kind of, QE oriented meme. And of course, that's God and Country, who does these things all the time. A Mike Benz post. Is anyone, look at this. What kind, again, from the same account, what kind of response is this? You have to wonder. you keep going and you just keep seeing these sorts of things. And you have awful, awful memes. Same account. Awful memes just all the way down. What are we at, 50 at this point? They just keep going. None of them are related to the post, though. And that's the point. None of them are related to the post. And in there, you can also find a bunch of bot responses. You can look at the accounts. The accounts seem totally illegitimate, but they're there to either grovel super hard about President Trump in order to get their MAGA street cred, or they are battling back against whatever Trump says. And you might have seen the one post there that was trying to call him Hitler, you know? So that's what you get in a Truth Social reply section. Now, why does that happen? I would suggest that it happens as part of a coordinated effort to make it impossible to see what actual Americans are saying in response to Donald Trump. Okay, it is just a cesspool in Trump's reply section. It is not worth examining. And the fact that it's not worth examining means that we don't have access to good information, which is the response of real people to the things the president is saying online. Okay, that's really important. Now, maybe some of that happens on Twitter, and that's fine, although Twitter's got its own system of grifting and clickbait and attention farming and the rest of it. So it's got its own problems there in the reply section because, of course, the accounts that Elon Musk always boosts always end up at the top of the reply section. This is what the algorithms are selecting for. But on Truth Social, you cannot get any good, reliable information on what people believe Trump is saying and what their response is. That is very unfortunate. Now, considering that real people are responding really well to Donald Trump in general, that's what I experience in my own life. That's what I experience in terms of the directionality of people in my life and how their beliefs have changed over time. Okay. I think that you probably all have that experience in similar fashion as well. We know that even with fake election numbers, he, quote unquote, won the fake election of 2024 by millions of votes, although they decreased the victory margin over time, exactly as I said they would do. So we have that, and there was no real contest. No one was really doubting that Trump had stolen the election and that Kamala actually won. So the mandate has been clear. He can walk into a stadium and he's cheered. There's numerous indirect proofs of Donald Trump's popularity, and he keeps pushing forward. And so doubting that he is popular doesn't make much sense. Knowing that, what we would have in a legitimate reply section to Donald Trump's posts are a lot of people supporting him, questioning what he means, etc. And that would spark a healthier and more productive conversation underneath Donald Trump's Truth Social posts. That doesn't happen. And I would suggest the reason that doesn't happen is because there is a concerted effort to prevent that from happening so that all of this stuff is obscured. So when Donald Trump reposts these garbage memes, whether they have to do with Q or they don't, okay, when he reposts posts like the Biden clones post, one of the possibilities that you have to allow for is that he is just highlighting these various accounts for whatever reason, maybe to target them in terms of dealing with bots or whatever. There's a lot of possibilities. There's not just the one possibility that he sees what that exact post is and that he's posting it because he's amplifying and confirming the message in that post. Okay. And likewise with the Q stuff, is Donald Trump Q plus? Yeah, I think there's a pretty good indication that that's the case and that the Q operation is run or was run in coordination with the Trump campaign. There's legitimate evidence and reason to believe that. Okay. It's also possible that Donald Trump is highlighting certain things in that operation on his own just to highlight them without that same connection. And it's entirely possible because, one of the things that I am constantly being beset with from trolls and retards online is that the mainstream media is fully under control. Mainstream media might be fully under control, or they might be boxed in to certain positions that suggest the potential for full control. All good. I get that that's possible. But you can't prove that by suggesting that the mainstream media is also hitting Q posts, because the Q posts are public. Literally anyone can post in a pattern that would correspond to them at any time. I could do that. I could start doing that tomorrow and make sure that every one of my posts before I hit send coordinates in some way with a Q post. The time, the post number, keywords in my post relative to keywords in the Q post. There are so many ways to play match online at this point that anybody can do it. Okay? The good guys, the bad guys, the white hats, the black hats, they can all do it just the same. They can speak the language of Q to the public anytime they want. And if you think that every match also indicates meaning, and it doesn't, it only indicates a match, and a very loose match often. If that's as far as you go, well, then anybody can hoodwink you at any point just for seeming to signal Q. That's crazy. Okay. And the same thing would apply here to this post. Now, I didn't expect to talk about this for quite so long, but I think it's an interesting topic. And I think that we need to, I think that this is part of discernment. Okay. Understand the range of possibilities. Keep an open mind to all those possibilities, right? Because we don't know. We don't even ultimately know the makeup of our physical reality. That is becoming proven at a quickening pace every day. Elon just posted today and amplified a message that we are speeding toward the singularity. Well, the singularity might have already happened. Okay. Our entire world might already be affected by that technological phenomenon. It may not even be a technological phenomenon. It might just be us realizing, oh, this is how the world is. Entirely possible. Okay. So when we understand that, we have to be humble. And when we understand that about our political reality, that most of it is built on fake news, that what's within that controlled opposition dynamic doesn't necessarily hold the truth anywhere in it, that it might be totally outside, we have to be humble. Okay. We can't say, I know what this is, because we don't know what it is. We don't know what Trump is doing, and we don't know what military intelligence is doing, and we don't know what Q is doing. Okay. We just don't. And so we can look at what's available and we can analyze it in all the variety of ways, keeping open all those possibilities. All right. Maybe it's exactly what the most hardcore decoders think it is at all times, right? The point is that we are discerning properly and thinking critically and being judicious in our assessments of which beliefs we're going to take on. Okay, because the truth is we actually don't have to have firm beliefs about any of these subjects. It's totally unnecessary. And if what General Qua says about quantum is true on any level, whether or not it's got to do with physics and computing, okay, or whether it's just a worldly interpretation of something we are otherwise not prepared to understand, and the magic of the world as it exists is explained with technology, in either case, again, we should understand that there is a lot of stuff we don't know about. If information can just be blipped in and out of reality at any point from the future or the past or whatever, if time all overlaps, which is possible, well, then what is our political news at that point? Okay. What is it to be analyzing political news and be forming beliefs about that political news by which we guide our lives? That's a huge mistake. And that is why we are meant to focus on the godly and not on the worldly when it comes to identifying ourselves with our beliefs. Okay. You can have a simple spiritual belief system with an objective foundation. But on top of that, everything worldly is going to be subjective. And within that subjectivity, we have to find the humility to be able to say, we don't know what the hell that is. Okay? Nobody knows what the hell that is. People who say they do are lying. Maybe Donald Trump does. Maybe some people in his orbit do. But right now, there's no answer on it. And more information than we would like to admit about our kind of public reality is like that than most of us would probably care to admit. All right, so let's leave that. Let's leave that to the side. Who knows when we will talk about clones and doubles and soulless, mindless entities again. Oh, wait. Speaking of Palantir, just kidding. Robotic engineered, soulless, mindless entities. Kind of aligns with Palantir a little bit. So we talked about Palantir on Friday and the New York Times article about how the Trump administration was pursuing contracts with Palantir so that their tech, their software, their programs, their systems, however you want to describe it, are going to be implemented in various parts of the federal government, including the IRS, which isn't really part of the federal government. Okay, so IRS data was going to be brought into the centralized data holdings of the federal government. They also had mentioned DHS. Is DHS part of the federal government? Well, we're certainly told that it is. It was implemented after a false flag attack, which is not to say that the buildings didn't come down, but certainly after a false flag attack about which we were lied to in infinite ways. Okay. And they have offices all over the world, which is strange if their focus is on homeland security. And it seems as though they are actually interested in protecting, as the homeland, the entirety of the global regime and its proxy states. That is how I perceive the DHS. And so we can look at some of these organizations and see which ones of them are kind of set up outside the reality prime base layer government that we are supposed to have that would be accountable to the original Constitution. So immediately right there, you have to wonder about the Palantir data. What data are they going to have access to? Is it data that the regime was able to cordon off prior to this period, during Trump's first term? Perhaps Trump's people were not able to gain full and proper access to IRS databases and some of these other databases. And why would you want to have these databases separate with personal identifying information on all Americans in all these databases? Well, then duplicates don't get scrubbed. The redundancies are not eliminated, which ends up recording a lot more people in the United States than probably exist. And we've seen at least we've been told that there is evidence of that pattern throughout the Doge discoveries. Okay, so that's possible. And then, if you have extra people, you can use them as the input product for election fraud, for voter registries, and those eventually lead to fake ballots in fake elections. So there's all sorts of reasons why that information should be collated and combined in one storage apparatus for the government. It's all government information. And we're supposed to be upset that all that information is going to be centralized. Or are we supposed to be upset that there's a private company involved in doing it? Now, again, if you've listened to my show for any duration, you'll understand that I am extremely skeptical about Peter Thiel, about Alex Karp, the current CEO of Palantir, Peter Thiel's co-founder, and about Palantir and Anduril themselves. Okay? I'm skeptical, we'll talk in a minute, about Peter Thiel's kind of philosophical mind to the extent that I'm aware of it, right? Which is admittedly not an expert, but with some awareness. And the J.D. Vance connection to the fact that J.D. Vance was Peter Thiel's guy, and J.D. Vance is now at least seen to be the vice president of the United States. So all these are significant concerns. At the same time, we know that the regime was already combining all of our data, analyzing all of our data. our biometrics, our health records, our banking records, our calls, our locations, our messages, the things we typed and didn't send. They have all that, and they use it to exploit us. They use it to change our beliefs and change our buying habits. That was already happening, okay? So in a situation where that was already happening, how is it that our government doesn't have access to it? That's a question that we have to ask. Wouldn't the government be the central hub of something like that? Considering even that Defense Department contractors are the tech companies with the infrastructure to actually contain that amount of data, Amazon Web Services, for instance, okay? So we have Defense Department contractors, we have the Defense Department itself, intelligence agencies, okay? We would assume that some combination of those things would be operating a system like that and then controlling a system like that, which would indicate in a normal world, the one that we were indoctrinated to believe was real, to the extent that, our real world is not normal and our normal world is not real. But in that world, we would expect that the government would have control over all of those entities and therefore control over those databases. Why wouldn't they have that? Why wouldn't it be centralized? Well, we heard Dominic Cummings talking the other day about how the deep level of the deep state, whether it's black hats or white hats, we don't know, but the deep level of the deep state is preventing any insight or oversight from the parts of the government. So somehow they've cordoned off their information, their plans, their agendas, their operations from the so-called elected government, okay? And it would make sense either in the worst case deep state scenario or in the best case Trump and military scenario that these things would be separated. The regime, looking at everything through good twin, evil twin, the regime would not want the good twin to possess all of its technology and information. And I've suggested many times that the takeover of Twitter, the shifts in Twitter, are some indication of an operation like that happening. Okay. So we have this centralized database that's algorithmically analyzed and then deployed to exploit us and guide our behaviors. Okay. And then we have these parts of government that are somehow outside of our normal constitutional form. And those parts of government were not sharing data with whatever the good twin government faction has access to. And so Palantir is being brought in to reacquire that access into that centralized hub underneath the Trump administration and the federal government. So we can talk more deeply about privacy issues. I know that that's a concern, but I think that ship has already sailed. We can talk about constitutional issues. That ship's probably already sailed too. Okay. And so when you wipe that aside, because it probably should be set aside, what's left is morality and practicality, the godly and the worldly, as always. Okay. So with that in mind, what's going on here and who is the most upset about it? So let's return to the Palantir conversation. I want to share this first. This was printed in many of the articles. The New York Times mentioned it. It goes a little further here in this article from Guru Focus, reprinted by Yahoo News. But just down here to the end, hold for processing. Still, not everyone's cheering. Inside Palantir, dissent is brewing. 13 former employees recently signed an open letter opposing the company's deepening role under Trump, citing risks of surveillance overreach and reputational blowback. This is a red line I won't redraw, said Brianna Catherine Martin, a departing strategist. Engineers have raised concerns about the aggregation of sensitive data and sloppy security practices from some government users. Palantir insists it acts purely as a data processor under client direction, but the scale and sensitivity of the work has sparked internal debates about how far is too far. Investors for now seem focused on the upside, but the longer term consequences could be harder to quantify. Okay. And so that's primarily reframed within a financial point of view. But the point that I want to focus on is the departing engineer and what her take is and why she's being so widely cited. This is something that we can observe in media all the time. When they want to make something look bad, they find a person who's quote unquote on the inside, and that person tells them something really bad is going on in the background. And it's being kept a secret from all you. I'm going to finally admit this. I'm going to be a whistleblower. She's not a whistleblower. Okay. So let's look at this. Let's look at her post. She originally posted this on LinkedIn, and Bay Theater Dave in the chat just said, remember to thumbs up. Every thumbs up recharges Chris's AI processor. That is true. I am one of those robotic engineered entities. I hope that I'm not soulless or mindless, though. I also was not actually robotically engineered. You know, I guess you need to say all these things at this point. So let's look at Catherine Martin's LinkedIn post. She says, today was my last day at Palantir. After much consideration, I decided to resign in light of the expansion of work with ICE under this administration. That's interesting. So they weren't working with ICE before. Now, if there's one thing we know about Palantir, it's that they can track the shit out of anybody. And so when it comes to illegal aliens, do you want them to be tracked? A lot of people would say yes, because we need to get them out of our country. Or immigration is being used as the front to increase the security state within the United States of America. And everybody should be concerned about this stuff, okay? It's not about going after Trump for doing this either way. What's critical is understanding what work is going to be done and what influence Palantir actually has. Maybe they have a lot of influence as a quote-unquote private company, or maybe they have very little influence as a defense contractor, a government contractor, overseen by probably elements of the military and elements of the intelligence community. So are there good people in that system running all of this? It's possible, but we don't know it to be true. So we have to look at both sides. Let's continue with this. I've always worked in fields with a degree of moral ambiguity and think of it as a necessary companion to meaningful work. Okay, Brianna, you sound insane. Implementing humanitarian aid programs required a constant redrawing of ethical red lines and a healthy dose of relativism. Implementing humanitarian aid programs requires you to be morally relativist and redraw ethical lines. For most of my time here, I found the way that Palantir grappled with the weight of our capabilities to be refreshing, transparent, and conscionable. This has changed for me over the past few months. I admire my colleagues who continue to do good work and interrogate its impact, including far future ripple effects that I may not be seeing. But for me, this is a red line I won't redraw. So, the work Palantir has done in the past was conscionable, refreshing, and transparent in the eyes of Brianna Martin. But the work that Palantir is going to embark on under the Trump administration is not refreshing, not transparent, and it is unconscionable. And therefore, she has to leave. Well, what was the change? Was it what the company was doing? Was it what the company's capabilities were? Or was it that Donald Trump is in charge now? And it would seem like it's that Trump is in charge. This is not the note I wanted to leave things on, she says. I'm saddened to leave the best, most brilliant, funniest, hardworking, and most adaptive colleagues I've ever had. I'm frustrated to leave capture efforts in mid-swing. I am so grateful to my colleagues for the time we spent working together on real-world problems. nuclear security, and HIV/AIDS response that lit us up through the late nights and surges. I'm going to miss you all a lot. But put bluntly, with the erosion of due process and institutions, this is not the time to erect a Maginot line of justifications based on comfort and compliance. It feels wrong. If it feels wrong to you, it probably is. So we are being told that due process and our institutions are being eroded under Donald Trump. Is due process being eroded? No. Due process is being challenged and litigated, not only in courts, but in the court of public opinion, and then ultimately by the president, if he so chooses, which is well within his constitutional rights. So I don't believe that due process is being thwarted. And I'm not of the belief that illegal aliens require due process. We can be compassionate and understanding. And however open to their side of the story we can possibly be, but that doesn't then mean that they have the right to due process when they are here illegally, when their presence already constitutes a violation of law. And Stephen Miller, in his interview with Laura Trump over the weekend that I listened to earlier today, he talks about how there is not just this set of rights for illegal aliens, and also that being sent back to your country, being deported, is not a punishment. It is just what the law requires. So as far as the institutions being eroded under Donald Trump, well, institutions are being eliminated. Perhaps your very important nuclear security and AIDS projects. We got nuclear existential threat, pandemic existential threat, both wrapped up in one. Palantir working on them. Where is the money coming from? USAID? I don't know that to be true, but I'm sure that we could probably trace it back there, considering these projects and the fact that she's talking about humanitarian aid. So this woman believed that she was doing humanitarian aid work and maybe some tech work too at this. She was an engineer, I think, that we've been told. So yeah, it actually says in her bio right there, humanitarian aid plus tech crossover. Okay. So she is on the global regime side of things, and the most corrupt part of the global regime side of things may well be their so-called humanitarian aid and their foreign aid and all of these ridiculous projects that they devote all the time, money, and energy to that are probably really in service of a different part of the agenda. The idea of nuclear security and the idea of helping people not die from HIV and AIDS is probably cover for something else. But let's continue with these Palantir reactions, because it wasn't only the people inside Palantir and the people on the quote unquote left, but really the uniparty, who were upset about this. And we might see right here some uniparty right. This is from Newsweek. This is just from today. Trump flipped on us. MAGA reacts to potential national citizen database. Does MAGA react, or did they find some questionable influencers to react? And you can judge this for yourself. Okay, so we understand the backstory here, and let's look at some of the responses. Numerous pro-Trump voices expressed dismay and feelings of betrayal across social media platforms like X. People are so quick to suggest that I flipped on Trump. No, I didn't flip on Trump. Trump flipped on us. I'm just not willing to continue living in a lie, and I will tell you the unfortunate truth about it. The Patriot Voice wrote on X to his 158,000 followers. The Hodge twins, popular conservatives and Trump supporters, have more than 3.3 million followers on X. In response to the New York Times report, they wrote on May 30th, "Hope this ain't true, y'all." Another post that same day reads, "Don't know if this is true, but I did not vote for this." Okay, well, you kind of did. Also, elections are fake, And who you voted for doesn't matter. Just say you think it's immoral. But then again, do you actually know that? Because I would bet my life. Well, I shouldn't say that. I would bet a great deal that these people have not gone deeply into these issues. Nick Fuentes, a far-right Trump supporter, described it as an America First white nationalist. Yeah, that's what he describes himself as. Called the association between the Trump administration and Palantir, quote, the ultimate betrayal of his own people. Feeding every MAGA extremist into an AI database controlled by a CIA Mossad cutout, Fuentes said on X, where he has 561,000 followers. Seriously, if Palantir isn't the deep state, then what is? And Palantir might be the deep state, or it might have been the deep state. What matters is what it's doing now. He says in a video recorded, Fuentes says they are tracking everybody that criticized Israel, everybody that interacts with somebody that's criticizing Israel, and whether you're on a visa or not, whether you're a citizen or not, whether you're brown or not, Christian or Muslim, they're putting you in the Palantir database. They're putting you on the enemies list. If you don't see a problem with that, and then it's just ... So Jack Maxey was MAGA, a giant psyop. I don't know who some of these other accounts are at all and don't really care very much. An activist named Jason Bassler said, no, this Palantir database isn't like others. It will combine tax filings, student debt, Social Security, bank accounts, medical claims, immigration status, and then wrote, no previous database system has ever centralized this much personal info across various federal agencies. And the question then would be, back to what we were talking about before, why hasn't it been? Why haven't those databases been combined? And there is some reason at least to believe that these things are specifically regime projects. Student debt to pay for these colleges, federal government funding of colleges and universities, is a regime agenda item. Taxes, IRS, and the Fed, regime. Social Security, regime. Bank accounts, I guess insofar as it's dealing with the IRS and the Fed, that would be on that side. Same thing with the medical claims. You could go either way on that. Immigration status, same thing. Okay? So those are all agencies that could have been separate from whatever centralized government database might exist or might have existed prior. Okay? We don't know ultimately how that situation worked. There's not transparency to these levels. And that makes our work really difficult. And we can dig and dig and dig and maybe make some headway. And I haven't done that yet, so maybe it's to go on the to-do list. I would like to understand firmly how these systems operate, but we can kind of understand the motivations behind the various parties and what they might have access to. Okay. And I would suggest the global regime had access to all of the information, all of it. Why would they prevent access they needed through their own representatives, through their own servants, right? They don't have people at the IRS who could get them all the data they needed. Give me a break. Same thing with these other subjects. Of course they can get that information. And of course they had that information. It would be crazy to believe that they didn't have all that information combined in one place that they could analyze. So I would have to suggest that to the extent they kept this information outside of what would be under the purview of the Donald Trump run federal government, it could be brought in right now. One other comment I want to read from this article, Justin Amash, who was one of the Freedom Caucus guys. He called himself a libertarian. Who were his buddies? Thomas Massey was one of his good buddies. And then he had another good buddy. I can't remember who it was. But Justin Amash is a Trump-hating cuck and has been. And that's why he's not in Congress anymore, because he got bounced early on in the Trump era. The surveillance state, the police state, the deep state are alive and well under Trump, Amash says. He signed bills to extend and expand mass surveillance. Now he's building profiles on millions of law-abiding Americans. It's an extraordinary threat to liberty. And, I can't disagree with the underlying concern. I just am a bit surprised that it is so important to all of these particular people now that Trump is the president. That indicates that there has been some sort of change in their thinking. Now, Amash has been pretty consistent with that kind of stuff, so I can't justifiably ding him on that one. But he's also been a constant Trump hater, and now all of this is a crisis. Did these companies have access before? They probably did. And on some level, if we want the sort of accountability that many of us seek, additional access to information is probably going to be required at some point. And so, again, I would suggest that this problem is probably already baked in and that we've probably actually been victimized by this problem quite a lot. So the fear that Amash is expressing, the scary thing has already happened, as is true with many of these issues. And the benefit from something like that, to the extent that there is a morally justifiable benefit, and people can have different opinions about that, but that benefit would not have accrued yet. So we would have all of the scary thing having already happened and none of the benefit. And so we will see if that changes under the new Trump administration. Now, Palantir, this is Alex Karp. These videos burst online this morning. They were at some sort of conference, and I'll find that while the video plays.
Hey, Gia. Yeah. Gia. Behind me.
Mr. Secretary, to live in a country where people are allowed to speak their mind, ask questions of their governments, because in fact, the adversaries we're up against, whether they're the genocidal communists in Beijing or the Salafi jihadists in the Middle East.
All right, so we'll let that go. I mean, it's annoying to listen to those clips, so for audio people, apologies. They were saying that genocide is not innovation. Of course, all the things that they're always saying, and Palantir is the problem in this instance. I'm not a defender of Palantir. Everybody knows that. But you also got to be even-handed with these things. It might just be that they're being signed up to do good work, having done bad work before. There's a lot of companies that can be described that way. So this event was, those were Code Pink protesters, and the banner said, Palantir kills in Gaza, surveils at home. The talk was between the Secretary of the Navy and Palantir's head of defense. And so I'm gonna have to watch this talk. But I misspoke earlier. I said it was Alex Karp. Here's one more video from that event.
Figure out how, if I really want to bring about change and bring about a more adaptable culture.
All right. And so then we get around to back where we were initially. So she just said that Palantir's AI is responsible for the killing of 50,000 people in Gaza. That sounds ridiculous. I'm not saying it's not possible. I guess you can create a scenario where it would be possible, but it sounds ridiculous. So Code Pink is protesting this deal with Palantir. The leftists, the humanitarians within Palantir are protesting this Trump Palantir deal. And so-called MAGA, mainstream, terminally online influencers are also against this Palantir and Trump deal. That's a strange collection of people. Why would all of these people be against this deal? Well, it must damage the Uniparty and the regime's interests. Otherwise, I can't imagine they would be against it. It's just a bridge too far to think that all of these people are A, fully informed about these issues and know what's actually going on. It's impossible to believe that. So are they all just expressing their deep moral convictions about privacy? Seems like something else is going on, man. I don't trust anything like that. And with that display by Code Pink, now I know that PSYOPs can work in both directions, right? If you want to manufacture consent, if you want to manufacture belief from our side, from our point of view on what Palantir is doing, you would have Code Pink protest them. But again, it's not just Code Pink. It's a lot of people going anti-Trump on this. And I guess we'll see in the future if it's justified. I don't know how that's going to turn out. And, you know, as I said Friday, it could be the case that Trump is operating in coordination with people with whom his interests and the interests of the American people are aligned for a time, and then they will be cast aside. Do we need Palantir in a real way as their private company if, in fact, the company was started with government funds in a person who was directed by government and doing government work for the entire time? Do we need Palantir's permission, or is it just their technology? And is the massive deal about more than just business? I think it's at least worth examining whether or not those are possibilities. Now, within the whole Peter Thiel milieu, we've talked many times about Curtis Yarvin. And I don't want to spend too much time on this, but I was surprised to see Yarvin on the front page of CNN over the weekend, because CNN is not the sort of place I would expect to be promoting Curtis Yarvin. And it's impossible to think of a CNN report as anything other than publicity. Now, maybe they're publicizing his viewpoint for good reasons. They're just trying to open up a conversation within the mainstream. It's entirely possible. It's also possible that CNN just has an active interest in supporting a Curtis Yarvin-oriented philosophy, probably somewhere downstream from that kind of tech oligarchy that would then control or have seized control of the Republican establishment and characters like J.D. Vance. Okay? So we got to consider it both ways. I don't think that CNN pumping Curtis Yarvin on their main page is some kind of mistake. Yarvin's also been doing pretty substantial events over the past few weeks. One of the debates is mentioned here in the piece, but let's just cut to the video. Here we are.
Hi. Hadas. Nice to meet you. Thanks so much for doing this.
Meet the man inspiring the next generation of MAGA, Curtis Yarvin, who thinks America should no longer be a democracy. Even before Trump's re-election, he envisioned a fantasy world where Trump was president again, and with chilling accuracy described how he would take aim at public and private institutions without any interference from Congress or the courts.
Obviously, I'm not the secret mastermind of the Trump-Vance administration.
You're not? I thought there was a hotline.
The software engineer and blogger has been called the father of dark enlightenment political theory. That means he thinks democracy is overrated, and what the U.S. needs is a king.
A monarch, a single focus of authority is, absolutely necessary to run any integrated system efficiently. You could probably put any of the Fortune 500 CEOs in and say, okay, you're in charge of the executive branch, fix this. They'd probably do fine. They wouldn't be Hitler or Stalin.
And he's got some powerful people listening.
think you're pretty far out in a way that is worth thinking about.
There's this guy, Curtis Yarvin, who's written about some of these things.
Years before Elon Musk and Doge, Yarvin coined the phrase RAGE, retire all government employees. Next, he sees a world where the power is not with the people.
Should there be, though, elections in your world of a sovereign CEO?
There needs to be a way of basically holding the sovereign CEO accountable.
But not every single person should have a vote.
Well, I mean, I have 4 beautiful children. None of them have a vote.
Experts in democracy like Harvard professor Daniel Allen, who publicly debated Yarvin, say his ideas are dangerous.
It is not the case that autocracies over the course of history have delivered good for human beings. They have consistently violated freedom.
Not surprisingly, Yarvin is no stranger to controversy. He's been accused of using racist tropes and whitewashing history.
Certain races are better at certain things than others.
Do you not necessarily believe, then, that certain races would be better at governing a country than others?
Oh, I mean, again, governing a country is just a skill. And, it's like the British in India would basically say, oh, this race is a governing race, this race is not a governing race, based on culture, based on tradition, based on biology.
So you're saying, yes, certain races would be better at running governments than others.
Would be better at doing anything, but those are only averages.
As for Trump, Yarvin says the administration is still not going far enough in harnessing executive power.
You laid out how you thought things could be done in a way that were fast, that may be a little bit dirty, and some of the things they do seem to be doing there in the White House. Are you not pleased with how they're doing it?
No, because I think that if you basically take anything complicated and you try to do 10% of it, you're not going to 5% or maybe 1%, you're probably not going to result in anything good.
Instead, Yarvin is looking to younger generations.
I think most of my influence on sort of the Trump administration is less through the leadership and more through like kids in the administration who read my kind of stuff because my audience is very young. And
are you in touch with staffers at the White House on a regular basis?
I don't really know what a regular basis is, but
are you emailing on the phone
with them? Are there people in the administration who are on signal groups with me? Yes, there are. I'm just out there in the marketplace of ideas, and I think the marketplace of ideas has definitely expanded in the last 10 years.
All right. So he's on signal group chats with members of the administration, and one can assume that one of those members is J.D. Vance. I think that's probably likely. So that's Curtis Yarvin. Now, there's nothing to what he says, okay? Curtis Yarvin, for the problems I have with him, is an intelligent guy. He's very clever, at least. He's crafty in what he's doing. He's talking about the monarch as like the chief executive of everything. There needs to be one node that is the ultimate decider. And that would be closer to the case if we just had the original Constitution, okay? So, and there were concerns about whether or not the president was too close to a monarch back then. And of course, we've been raised to believe that a monarchy is the worst possible thing. In fact, our country was founded to get rid of monarchy. It's important to remember that our country was founded to get rid of a foreign monarchy, okay? And that our country was founded on preserving personal liberty. But the idea that monarchy is necessarily bad, well, that can't just be the case. It's got to be bad relative to something or good relative to something. In France, what replaced the monarchy was head-chopping communists, and then eventually an emperor. So I don't know if monarchy is a solution, but the president, as it was initially designed, the presidency, as it was initially designed, would be a central node that could make sure that the agenda was implemented in one direction. I think that we already have the possibility to satisfy the goals Yarvin has within the framework of the original Constitution. And if not, we can scale back further from there. That's my preference, okay, rather than going straight to monarchy. But the other thing about Curtis Yarvin is that he doesn't want massive nation states either. He wants a patchwork of different governments in different locations. And that's very much in line with the sovereign individual and the stuff that Peter Thiel talks about again, Peter Thiel wrote the foreword to the recent edition, I think it was 2018 edition of The Sovereign Individual. Okay, so he's along these lines. We're talking about these little city-states that would be ruled by their own monarchs, and people would choose to live there, always with the possibility for exit. I don't know how you guarantee that, as I've said before, but they would basically just pay taxes as a subscription to that society that they wanted to live in. So in the chat, EC was here, said, let me find it. Where is it? Sorry, hold for processing. Chat is hopping right now. He said if he, being Yarvin, thinks one can have a monarch without an aristocracy, then he's a chump. Well, yeah, I mean, I would totally agree with that. I would suggest that Yarvin would agree with that too. I don't think that he's claiming the aristocracy wouldn't follow. I think he anticipates the aristocracy and believes that the aristocracy should be allowed to do what it wants. And that's when these sorts of situations become more dangerous in the way we might conceive of them if applied broadly across society. So if Peter Thiel wanted to take a few 100,000 acres somewhere, right? I mean, Jeff Bezos, he bought a few, I think over 100,000 acres for his corn ranch in West Texas. It's a lot of land. Could he build out an entire society there that would be based on the needs of people who really loved Amazon? And he could have his own sort of whatever experience he wanted, right? He could have his ridiculous yacht with his plastic wife and have parties with people like that all the time, and then just have celebrities live there or whatever. And he has his own massive Amazon commune, the state of Bezos. In Yarvin's system, that's the sort of thing that would be happening. Okay. And then, of course, you'd have private security within that tiny city state or nation state or whatever it would be. Right. So all of those things would be possible. And if you eliminate the aristocracy, the oligarchy from that picture, then all we have is just kind of the fragmented societies with much smaller nation states that we used to have many hundreds of years ago in Europe. So I don't know. I don't think that the notion is all that crazy, but I'm also not sold on Yarvin's picture of it or his reasons for wanting it. And because of the associations and because of the concerns I have about how he perceives things, I would not be inclined to go along with him. That said, he's given partial credit for the quote unquote dark enlightenment. Nick Land is given credit for the dark enlightenment just the same. It's the two of them, basically. I'm a big fan of Nick Land and not a fan at all of Curtis Yarvin. So I don't know where that leaves me. I want to show one other video just quickly. This is a conversation that I watched between some British host and Curtis Yarvin on the outlet Unheard. This was from, it says 8 months ago, September 6th of last year. Okay. So I just want to share a couple of minutes of this where Curtis Yarvin goes through what he believes happened during the very deadly pandemic and what the role of science and government was in causing it.
The effect of SARS-1 on the virology community was to do something. When you do science, and I used to be a grad student in computer science, and sort of this, it was a very long time ago, but I was sort of creeped out by this way of doing things. When you do science today, basically science is funded by grants. And when you write a grant proposal, you are saying to the government, here is a problem that is important to society, and I'm going to solve it. Such as the problem of the emergence of bat coronaviruses into the human population. We know it's a problem. We saw it happen. Hundreds of people were killed by SARS, bad disease. Okay, real problem. How would we solve this problem? Well,
let's just pause there. Okay. So SARS-1 was zoonotic. It came from the animal population and affected humans. So we know that can happen. Curtis Yarvin says it can happen. Okay. And we know that there were a couple hundred deaths from SARS. We know that somehow. Tests or something. Or just likely SARS. Or maybe they just use statistics to create the reality of a problem that has no reality. So I would already say, Yarvin, you don't know any of these things. I know that that's what the medical history says, but we just watched all the people who compiled that history lie about what was going on in 2020. So why would you believe them from years earlier? It makes no sense. And he never confronts issues like that, as far as I know. And his body of work is massive, so I cannot pretend to have even sliced off a fraction of that at this point, a substantial fraction. But I have never seen it. And the fact that he still talks like this means he hasn't contended with that problem. Let's continue.
We would investigate, we're just abstract knowledge. We were going to investigate the possibility that another bat coronavirus will emerge. There was a grant. They use these acronyms like acronyms of names. It was called the PREDICT grant. We're going to predict the emergence of bat coronaviruses. Not really sure what you were going to do with it when you predicted it, but we're going to predict it. How are we going to predict it? Well, the first step is to go and sample all the bat coronaviruses. And there's a funny story in there, which is, does anyone know the name Gerald Durrell? Lawrence Durrell?
Oh, yeah, as in My Family and Other Animals.
Exactly. I was a huge fan as a kid of Gerald Durrell books because I spent some time in the Commonwealth and those books were everywhere. And great writer, great books. And Gerald Durrell basically was a zoologist, and his specialty was going to little decaying pieces of the British Empire and finding cute, fuzzy, cuddly little animals and bringing them home in cages and breeding them in the zoo he established. And he established an organization called the Wildlife Trust, which was basically in the business of doing this. Okay. I love cute, fuzzy little animals, but they're not a problem. They're not relevant. We're not going to be attacked by bush babies, tomorrow. But what we are going to be attacked by is bat coronaviruses. So actually, someone who had worked for the Wildlife Trust realized that there was a richer source of grants elsewhere. His name was Peter Daszak. And Mr. Daszak, Dr. Daszak, I believe, turned the Wildlife Trust into an organization called EcoHealth Alliance. And EcoHealth Alliance was like, okay, our zoologists are going to go into the field, and instead of collecting cute, fuzzy little bats, they're just going to get the bat viruses. And we're going to go to all these bat caves and get all the bat viruses. And we're going to subcontract this work to China because it's cheap and they're right there in bat country. And
I'm not sure this is what he had in mind when he was doing My Family and Other Animals.
I'm not sure this is what he had in mind when he was doing My Family and Other Animals. I think he might be a little shocked. Now, the thing is, you can go and collect all these bat coronaviruses, but there's a problem, which is that they're bat viruses. They don't naturally affect people. They don't naturally jump to people. They don't naturally emerge. What they have to do to emerge is to mutate. Okay, things mutate. DNA makes little mistakes but the thing is, that's a random and slow process. So if you're going to predict how these things are going to mutate, if you're going to analyze the possibility that they're going to mutate and become human viruses, well, you could just mutate them yourselves. And you might say, for example, what if a bat coronavirus developed a furin cleavage site so that it could become much more effective at infecting humans? We could basically engineer a furin cleavage site into this bat coronavirus, and we could infect humanized mice with this. And we know that this research was proposed. We don't know whether it was done, but it was essentially a recipe for COVID. And if COVID, maybe it wasn't caused COVID, maybe it was a bat coronavirus that just emerged in the same place at the same time in the same way as this research. But, it's possible. But the thing is, it's like, well, maybe you clubbed your ex-wife on the head. Maybe you just swung a club at her and she fell down the stairs and broke her head. But you shouldn't have been doing that, And
it's not very relaxing how you're laughing in that.
So, well, we all have exes, but
I mean, I say some ums, don't get me wrong, but I try to not do the and thing constantly, but he does. So anyhow, his take on what happened with the very deadly pandemic is retarded. Okay. So I get that he believes in the lab leak theory, and I suppose that that's better than its controlled opposition dynamic alternative, which was the official story within the central narrative about it emerging in a wet market and infecting humans. And we've had this naturally occurring virus, and now it's killing everybody everywhere. Well, alternative to that, we have the lab leak theory. They were studying this, Peter Daszak, EcoHealth, gain of function research. That virus got out or was released on purpose or was intentionally infected into somebody. And then we had a real pandemic. No, we did not have a real pandemic. Okay. People were not dying in the streets at any point. There were deaths caused by the hospital protocol among people who were already of a significant age and had other significant health concerns. Every COVID death was either medical malpractice or data malpractice. Okay? There's no test that shows COVID. Therefore, you cannot say that we had a pandemic, especially when the people who are said to have died from COVID died from a medical protocol that we know can kill them. Okay? So to think that the lab leak explains a real pandemic is to already accept the notion that we had a real pandemic, and we did not have a real pandemic. And you can't prove that by the statistics of the same people who lie about everything else. So there are logical problems and epistemological problems in Yarvin's mode of thought when it comes to the coronavirus that infect everything else he writes. Constant references to the central narrative about World War II and other historical events. He actually, interestingly, because I don't hate the man. I just think he's like really overrated, and his ideas aren't nearly as good as powerful people think his ideas are. Okay. He did bring up Chernobyl as an example of when a nation's entire reason for being is called into question and refuted by a disaster of a certain magnitude. Now, the problem is, because I think that this is a very relevant comparison to what happened with the coronavirus, because I think that we had institutions, systems of government totally refuted by that entire experience. Yarvin is playing it up so that the new way can be ushered in. That's very much in line with the Great Reset. To not understand Yarvin as being palatable to those on both sides, quote unquote, of the uniparty tech divide when it comes to the pursuit of the Great Reset is to make a mistake. He's right in there, right on board with it. So he says COVID refutes our government's modus operandi, okay? The same way that Chernobyl refuted the Soviet modus operandi of the time. That was supposed to be the thing that told us, well, this system of government just doesn't work. And they even did a great HBO series on Chernobyl in 2019 or maybe even 2020, or at least that's when it was broadcast. Fantastic series, but reaffirms the official story and then also throws in, oh yeah, there's actually magnificent animal wildlife there. And the things that we said about these nuclear disasters and how they would poison everything forever. Oh, it turns out that's not true. So that's it. That is in there. But the point is, to make his point, you have to accept the official story within the central narrative about Chernobyl and about the whole Fauci thing. Okay? Because if you understand both of those to be these tragedies that were probably caused on purpose and then exploited for whatever reason, both situations take on entirely different implications. And, you know, he doesn't, to my experience with Yarvin's work, I have never seen him wrestle with these kinds of problems. He believes that there is a counter narrative to most of history. And then he just, again, decides within that controlled opposition dynamic what stuff in the middle works for him. And that, I think, is a spectacular intellectual failure that our elites and wannabe elites will continue making maybe until the end of days. And Curtis Yarvin is certainly one of those. I've said before, he is the scientific materialist, Jewish atheist grandson of a communist. who he says helped defeat Hitler. Okay, an American communist who helped defeat Hitler. And he thinks that this is actually like good for him and his reputation. He comes from good stock or whatever. He went to Brown University. Okay, Brown's as liberal as they come and as elitist as they come. So I think that Curtis Yarvin is very much a product of all of that. And the fact that Peter Thiel and J.D. Vance and others gravitate toward his philosophy and his image of the future, I think should be very concerning, okay? Because even if you want to go so far as to call these people right-wing or on the right in any way whatsoever, you still can't, by doing that, eliminate the elitism. And the elitism is part of the picture of that image of the future. And it can't be detached. And so, again, I would say in response to EC's comment there that I think Curtis Yarvin totally understands the existence of the aristocracy. It's also worth mentioning before we wrap this up that the Senate was initially devised as a body to represent the aristocracy. Okay? The Democratic body, quote unquote, little d, would be the House of Representatives. Okay? Those would be the direct representatives of the people en masse. And then the Senate would be the deliberative body to make sure that what the people wanted could be married to the needs of the powered and moneyed and landed elite, the aristocracy. And you could say, well, they shouldn't have a say. It should just be everybody. Well, that's not actually true, okay? Because people with more power and more ability to wield power, more influence on society, the people who societies rely upon are going to have to get their way about certain things if the society is going to keep chugging forward as we want it to be, right? We can't just abolish the energy companies, for instance, right? And take people without any experience in the field and just throw them in front of the energy company to the extent we need it, just nationalize it, throw some average Joe in front of it and expect that it's still going to work the same. Okay, that's not how the world works. So it has to be taken into account. The power, the money, the elites, that has to be taken into account. The property owners, I should have also mentioned. And so we had a system to do that. And then we eliminated that system because we said our society's a democracy. The people get to vote for absolutely everything. Well, if you let the people vote for everything, then the system as designed can't function as designed because it was designed and agreed to so that it would function that way and not this way. And we can see that it doesn't function now. So, yeah, I think that the aristocracy on some level is going to be taken into account no matter what governmental form we exist in. And it's worth remembering that the people who put our Constitution in place originally, many of them were the landed aristocracy and powerful people in the military, right? So the high-level enemy that we concern ourselves with, like everything else, is also good twin, evil twin, which is why it's important to discern that distinction, especially so when we're talking about the most powerful people in societies. Not all of them are bad, though. And not all of them want things that are antithetical to the wants and needs of the people generally. All right. Okay. So, man, oh man. I did not think I was going to spend that much time on either of those topics, but having done so, I feel that it was worth it. I hope it's worth it. I find myself saying that often now. And I don't know, maybe I just need to edit myself more. As long as you guys are okay, I'm okay. I think this is important stuff. Let's go to Rolling Stone today. And a name that we have not discussed in probably a long time. The one and only Pillow Man, Mike Lindell. And you know what? While we're at it, I think I'm going to have to bring out My old Lindell design. Maybe it's time has come again. I took the Iceman Cometh DVD case, like the film poster, and changed it into The Nice Man Cometh. And it was all about Mike Lindell and the Cyber Symposium. I'll have to do a version 2.0 for his current trial. He says, of course, the headline says, of course I'm going to testify. Mike Lindell's defamation trial is going to be wild. So this is Aswin Subsang. And we've covered his work many times over the years. Mike Lindell has brought him up an incredible amount of times. He used to talk about Swin all the time. And so this here is Swin. Aswin Subsang. And before we get to the article, I just also want to mention that one of the episodes that we talked about him at length, it was because he had done a couple of pieces in Rolling Stone about how Trump was going to reinstate death squads. Remember that? Because Trump wanted to bring back federal executions, Trump was going to reinstate death squads. And again, the reinstatement of federal executions is one of the reasons why people are like, hey, Joe Biden might have gotten executed. Maybe. Let's go to the Rolling Stone article. I'm going to testify, Mike Lindell, the CEO of MyPillow and staunch Donald Trump ally, tells Rolling Stone. Of course I'm going to testify at my own trial. I have nothing to hide. I'm a former crack addict. I've always been open about that. I've always been open about everything. I'm as transparent as they come, so I have nothing to hide at this trial. And good for Lindell. That's exactly what you should say. It's wonderful that people are confident enough to argue their own case in a court setting. And I don't think Mike Lindell does have anything to hide. I'm open to the alternative. It's possible that Lindell was just a psyop, a total and complete rug designed to get all of us to look like fools, to get the election integrity movement headed off in the wrong direction. I grant that that's possible, but I don't think that's true. I think Mike Lindell was used as a megaphone by Donald Trump to continue telling the country that the election was stolen and making a lot of news in doing so. And I think that he was probably very successful in doing that. I also have pretty good reason to believe that Mike Lindell has whistleblower status and protections that date back to the Trump administration. And everybody remembers the famous picture of Mike Lindell with his coffee cup outside the White House after his meeting with President Trump. And the thing said on the forms in his hands, I think it talked about Kash Patel becoming director of the CIA or something like that. I can't remember exactly. We don't need to pick it up right now, but let's continue. The MAGA diehard and pillow magnate who flooded Fox News with commercials as the network's pivot toward extremism frightened off prominent blue chip advertisers has been one of the foremost and certainly one of the loudest promoters of the false idea that Trump won the 2020 election. Lindell has particularly pushed conspiracy theories about voting machines being rigged against Trump. And yes, he says he's going to melt the machines down and turn them into prison bars. Also, once again, we have a regime outlet stating confidently that something obviously false is in fact totally true. The false idea that Trump won the 2020 election. Well, the false idea is that Joe Biden received 81 million real lawful American votes and won a real election in 2020. The idea that Trump won the election is not at all a false idea. It is actually an idea that has not been properly adjudicated and shown to the public at this point, and hence this trial. What timing? The trial set to begin next week, and this was a few days ago, so that's today. The trial's beginning today, I mean. The trial set to begin next week stems from a defamation lawsuit filed in 2022 by former Dominion voting systems employee Eric Coomer. Coomer alleges Lindell targeted him as part of his disinformation campaign, including by claiming Eric the Dominion guy conspired to rig the election against Trump on an Antifa conference call. The lead up to the trial has been fraught, with Lindell's lawyers admitting they used generative AI to file legal documents and the judge slamming them for dozens of defective citations, including of legal cases that do not exist. Well, that's not good. Lindell, assuming it's true, Lindell has repeatedly denied any wrongdoing and speaks about his decision to testify as if it's a public good. I didn't go into this haphazardly. I want to help this country. I want these machines gone. And I would suggest that Mike Lindell's testimony is a public good and is a benefit to the country. One way or another, hopefully we will get closer to the bottom of this issue. And if it comes out in the course of this trial that actually Dominion's voting machines can't produce a reliable result in a way that the public finally then recognizes because of the publicity of this trial, then we're in good shape. Okay, that's a necessary understanding for the American people to have, because the preeminent experts in the field have shown that the machines cannot produce a reliable election result and therefore shouldn't be counted on as part of our elections. That would invalidate all of our elections, and that is a regime nightmare, obviously. And it's also a nightmare to the vast majority of the uniparty right, who may not even support the regime, but support their own power and their own self-image as responsible, patriotic, intelligent Americans, okay? Denying that our elections are fake since 2020 on the Republican side, when it comes out that our elections are fake, when people fully understand that, well, all of them are going to look terrible. And that's kind of a big deal. By the way, in this whole PSYOP, I want to include this little piece that I didn't think to include. So this is David Mamet, the screenwriter and playwright, on Bill Maher's podcast last week. So let's switch over to this real quickly. He doesn't believe the election was stolen either.
It was on your show and you said, are you implying that that the election was stolen? And I was kind of iffy on it, right? Next morning, 8 o'clock, the phone rings. A woman on the phone says, Mr. Mamet, will you hold for the president? I said, wait a second, Biden is calling? It's Trump. It's during the Biden administration. And he says, David, it's Donald Trump. I say, Mr. President, thank you for calling. To what do I owe the honor? He said, I saw you on Bill Maher yesterday. You were great. He said, but you wussed out on the question of the stolen election. And then he talked to me for like 20 minutes about how the election was stolen.
But it wasn't.
Well, I think it was.
And I haven't actually seen the whole episode, so maybe there's more context in that conversation. But that's Mamet saying to Bill Maher on a widely watched by normies television show that he believes the election was stolen. He talked about it to Donald Trump for 20 minutes. He also said that the woman on the phone asked, can you hold for the president? And then Trump came on, not Biden. That's so weird, isn't it? Because Biden was definitely the president. And then you just have Donald Trump out there acting like the president the whole time, working out of the winter White House the whole time. Crazy, isn't it? All right. So back to Lindell. And I'm just going to skip down a bit in this article because it's a bit long and I don't want to go through the whole thing. I don't think that's necessary. Where are we here? Oh, man. Hold for processing. Now we've got it. Okay. We're back on track. Defense attorneys sometimes advise their clients not to take the stand and testify under oath, arguing it won't help their case and could even harm them considerably. Lawyers offer this recommendation often in criminal trials when their clients are particularly divisive public or political figures, and especially if they have a lengthy track record of making the kinds of bombastic public statements or admissions that can be used against them in a court of law. This is why several of Trump's top advisors and lawyers did not want him to testify at his own Manhattan criminal trial. or before the House committee investigating the deadly January 6th Capitol attack Trump instigated. Trump ultimately agreed with his attorneys. Well, sorry, Swin. Trump did not instigate that quote-unquote attack. You can hear his communism bubbling to the surface without him even so much as speaking it. Those proceedings you're talking about, though, the Manhattan criminal trial and the House January 6th Capitol attack, those are fake, right? The January 6th committee was a sham. It was a television show. The committee was not properly formed according to Congress's own rules. It was a TV show made by a TV producer meant to show all of America in prime time that what the media said about January 6th was what actually happened on January 6th. That's all that was. Trump's criminal trials, all of the Trump trials and the Trump indictments were ridiculous. They were all based on white papers from Norm Eisen at Brookings Institution. And Swin still believes it all. And we're supposed to take him seriously. And so when you understand that someone is so brain broken as this, then you have to adjust for the inversion consistently. And after doing that, it's actually possible to at least understand what they're trying to say. Civil proceedings are different, he says, and sometimes a refusal to testify can be used against the individual in a way that it can't in a criminal trial. Regardless, even in civil defamation trials, defense attorneys frequently counsel the client to say as little as possible on the stand and avoid grandstanding of any stripe. Lindell is taking a markedly different approach in the days leading up to the trial. If any attorney advised me not to testify or to take a deal, I'd tell them never, Lindell says. I speak truth. I've been in many courts in my life, and don't testify is what they tell guilty people in my mind. I'm not going to incriminate myself. I've done nothing wrong, he adds. Do you think I want to make a deal? I'll spend every dime I have to save this country, and I'll borrow money if I have to. So Lindell has not backed down at all. Now, the facts of the case and the fact that Coomer is bringing it will be relevant ultimately to the final decision. And regardless of the final decision, Lindell's going to be okay. But even if he fails in this legal effort and Eric Coomer wins some court decision about how much money Mike Lindell owes him, Lindell will survive and will go on. The important thing is whether or not evidence of stolen elections comes to light in this trial. Now, if Lindell is going to testify in this trial, well, that's at least more pressure for Coomer to testify and for more examination of the Coomer side of things. And I think that that'll be important. But regardless, I would just look at this as a narrative foundation, and we're going to see what emerges on that. But the timing is incredible. Right down to the wire. We have the 250th birthday celebration coming up, the military parade and the rest of it. That's a significant event. Trump has indicated on a number of levels that that's going to be a significant event. Now, I believe it's kind of just a phase change, but maybe it could be more. Maybe there's more to be revealed by then. Okay. Maybe it's just a show of strength before what's coming next, because what would be coming next would be a bunch of Supreme Court decisions that usually come out at the end of June. This is going to be a big month. There's a lot to come this month, a lot of significant news. The Supreme Court, I don't know that they're going to do this. I'm not suggesting that they are, but they could potentially remove birthright citizenship. And then what does that mean for illegal aliens and the children of illegal aliens who are in this country and believe themselves to be citizens? How are we gonna work that out if they do decide that way? Anyhow, I think it's incredible that the election is coming right back to the fore at this unique time after not hearing anything about this for a very long time. The best is yet to come notes in the Rumble chat that Ash and Brian went over all Lindell's and Coomer's trial stuff last Friday on why we vote on Badlands was a good show. thank you for that. And Brian and Ash are both very, very thorough researchers who have spent an incredible amount of time on election fraud over the last few years. And so if this is an issue that's important to you, I would recommend watching that episode of Why We Vote, but in general, just watching Why We Vote over on Badlands. And let's, I was going to say, let's take a break for a second, but let's get through these and then we'll take a break. So speaking of the court cases, I had a whole thing lined up last week about the court cases. And it's one of those times where it's hot in the news cycle and then it's not hot in the news cycle and something else is hot. And we have these kind of bigger picture issues that I think about that I don't want to miss out on discussing. And so then some of this stuff falls by the wayside. But this is Harry Enton on CNN talking about some of the court cases.
The courts have halted Trump's admin agenda a huge number of times. What are we talking about? We're talking about at least 181 times that they have temporarily, at least temporarily, halted Trump's agenda. That is a huge number. To give you that in percentage terms, in over 50% of the cases that are presented to courts, the Trump administration agenda has been halted at least temporarily. So Donald Trump, tries to do these actions with his administration, but the courts have been saying, hold on, wait a minute here. And they have said that at least 181 times so far in just the first few months of this administration. The courts have halted Trump's.
All right. Sorry, that started repeating. So I want to go from there to this. This is Insurrection Barbie on X, formerly Twitter. You still want to tell me this is not a coordinated operation to undermine a president that was duly elected by an overwhelming majority of the American people? Here's Norm Eisen bragging that he has 152 open legal matters against the administration. He filed the first one at 12:01 p.m. I would suspect she means on January 20th. He had someone listening on their iPhone to the swearing-in ceremony. Look at the perverse level of happiness and the evil gleam in his eyes as he says it. You couldn't script a better villain if you created one yourself. This is deranged. And is it possible that he was created as a villain? Well, yes, it certainly is possible. Is it a low probability possibility? I don't know. You're going to have to judge for yourself. We shall see. But as I said, Norm Eisen was behind all of the Trump indictments, and he was behind the Democracy Playbook. He is the author of Color Revolutions all over the world. And oh yeah, John Roberts, Chief Justice of the Supreme Court, stays at Norm Eisen's like Czechoslovakian or Czech Republic, or whatever you call it now, castle. I think it's Czech. That's crazy. The author of the Color Revolution Playbook worldwide, responsible for all of the Trump indictments, fake though they may be, right? You got a captured system. They use that regime captured system. All of that is the regime's property. And we all just believe that's the only thing that exists. So we see it as the courts rather than the regime's courts. Okay. But the lawfare apparatus has been built out specifically for this sort of thing, to make it so that anyone who opposes the agenda can be thwarted from the get-go and nothing happens. So they could just ride it out for a few years and then seize power again. Okay, so here's Norm Eisen.
Now at Crew, we have 152 open legal matters against the Trump administration since January 20th. We filed the first one at 12:01 p.m. We want to file the very first lawsuit. I had somebody listening on their iPhone to the swearing in and standing at the GSA to drop a complaint on them about the Trump Hotel. Just compelled by circumstances. And when Trump is ejected, as I believe he will be, then I'll help stitch up some of the damage and I'll go back to book writing.
There you go. All right. Meredith, Norm paints a pretty bleak picture about the current state of things. You're a veteran of the reform field, having worked at Common Cause, the Campaign Legal Center, now at Issue 1. So how does the reform community respond to this moment?
All right. So I suppose that could have stopped earlier. But there you have it. Norm Eisen. He also says he thinks that Trump will be ejected. Well, what does that mean? Impeached or something else? How's that going to happen? Norm Eisen's definitely got plans. A lawsuit, a legal action about the Trump Hotel to be dropped off at the General Services Administration at 12:01 p.m. on January 20th. So the minute after Trump is inaugurated, or whatever it was that happened on January 20th, already a case is being filed. The service is being delivered at 12:01. That is Norm Eisen. That person is trying to overturn the will of tens and tens and tens of millions of Americans. Okay, the majority of Americans. Norm Eisen himself is one of the leaders in attempting to thwart that, and nothing could be more obvious. It is a long-running color revolution, and we should see those Trump indictments in the same light, okay? They weren't just Trump indictments from attorneys general and district attorneys around the country realizing that they thought Donald Trump had committed a crime and then investigating the crime and then prosecuting that crime. None of that. Norm Eisen wrote 300-page long white papers based on media reports that set up the legal arguments that those attorneys would end up filing in those lawsuits, in those indictments. It's fake. I don't know how else to say it, okay? It's being generated as part of the color revolution, and you can see that it is ongoing. We should not be mistaken about these things. Okay, now let's change course completely, and we'll spend the rest of the show on some geopolitics, and maybe this will get us into overtime. I hope not. I don't like going over 3 hours, but you know, there might only be 2 shows this week and one of them is an interview. So I want to be sure I have the opportunity to hit a lot of stuff and give it proper time. Here is Donald Trump on Truth Social. This is from last week. This is from, what day are we dealing with here? Wednesday of last week? Yes. No, Tuesday. But I want to talk Canada for a second while we're doing this geopolitical business. Donald Trump said, "I told Canada, which very much wants to be part of our fabulous Golden Dome system, that it will cost $61 billion if they remain a separate but unequal nation, but will cost $0 if they become our cherished 51st state. They are considering the offer." That, to me, sounds like Donald Trump is purchasing Canada. $61 billion is what Canada would be charged, or perhaps it would be some fee that is paid in addition to some money that is not flowing back into Canada that makes up a $61 billion cost. It's kind of hard to tell by the wording there. But that's a financial leverage point for Canada to become the 51st state. Now, I don't know if that's going to happen or not, and I don't really care. I'm down with it either way. I don't think that we need more states. I don't think we need to govern more territory. But in a practical way, it might just be the case that the United States, being the dominant superpower of North America and potentially the dominant superpower of the world, although I think that that's not as clear-cut a case to be made, to be the dominant superpower of North America and need to have all of North America protected from the regime, then the United States has to have military oversight of all of North America. And if that upsets people, so be it, I guess. But at some point, we're going to have to get down to the reality of the situation. And the reality of the situation is that to the extent we are right about what Donald Trump and these other world leaders are doing in pursuit of this multipolar world order, to the extent we're right about what they're doing is contesting the global regime that has been in control of everything for a very long time and have made it impossible for nations to successfully withdraw themselves from their control apparatus. That's what's being attempted right now. And to attempt that and to be successful in doing it and to then preserve it and hold on to it for a time, at some point you're going to have substantial physical defense around all the borders and the countries at the borders. So is that the direction it's going? I've been inclined to believe that's where it's going, and I think that we're probably along those lines as well. 200T in the chat says, didn't King Charles say something recently about Canada belonging to the indigenous people? Yes, we went over some of that last week. King Charles, quote unquote, was in Canada to give the opening of Parliament speech. And that speech was written for him by the Canadians. So he gave someone else a speech, and yes, they recognized the indigenous people of Canada. And Donald Trump has indicated that the border was kind of just made up and that the country's kind of made up anyway. And if we are scaling back to how things were before the regime redrew all of these maps, before the Civil War era, and you can keep going, then it's going to be a different control situation in Canada. I think that that's coming into form at this point. But I wanted to play a little bit of Mark Carney as he attempts to suggest that Canada is going to be strong and sovereign.
The global economy is fundamentally different today than it was yesterday. The system of global trade anchored on the United States that Canada has relied on since the end of the Second World War, a system that, while not perfect, has helped to deliver prosperity for our country for decades, is over. Our old relationship of steadily deepening integration with the United States is over. The 80-year period when the United States embraced the mantle of global economic leadership, when it forged alliances rooted in trust and mutual respect, and championed the free and open exchange of goods and services, is over. Well, this is a tragedy. It is also the new reality. We must respond with both purpose and force. We are a free, sovereign, and ambitious country. We are masters in our own home.
Well, that's not actually true because you depend on the U.S. economy to run your economy, and your country is subsidized by our country. So that's all very lovely, but it's meaningless. And coming from Mark Carney, it's especially meaningless. Mark Carney, of course, is a tool, ultimately. Let us continue here. Polymathanon in the chat. Thank you once again, Chris, for a reasonable show. Appreciate it as always, brother. Also, I think APL is trying to look more reasonable. If that's her, she does look more reasonable. It's better than this. Natural faces. Thumbs up to natural faces. Okay, let us continue. We can forget about Canada for who knows how long, maybe a long time. I want to rewind a little bit on Iran and Israel vis-a-vis Trump last week because we didn't get to it. But I thought that this clip from last week was really something.
Back at Iran, did you warn Prime Minister Netanyahu against taking some sort of actions that could disrupt the talks there in a phone call last week?
Well, I'd like to be honest. Yes, I did. Next question, please.
Mr. President, just last on sanctions.
I did, yeah.
If Senate Republicans want to push
It's not a warning. I said I don't think it's appropriate.
What exactly did you tell him? Did you
I just said I don't think it's appropriate. We're having very good discussions with him, and I said I don't think it's appropriate right now. Because if we can settle it with a very strong document, very strong, with inspections and no trust. I don't trust anybody. So no trust. I want it very strong where we can go in with inspectors. We can take whatever we want. We can blow up whatever we want, but nobody getting killed. We can blow up a lab, but nobody's going to be in the lab, as opposed to everybody being in the lab and blowing it up, right? Two ways of doing it. Yeah, I told him this would be inappropriate to do right now because we're very close to a solution. Now, that could change at any moment. It could change with a phone call. But right now, I think they want to make a deal, and if we can make a deal, save a lot of lives.
There's a lot in that clip. So he doesn't trust anybody. Why would he have to trust anybody? That's great. Get that out of the way. Apply that principle in your life to the way you interpret who's on TV. I can't tell you how many times I've heard over the years, oh, can we trust that person? Can we not trust that person? I trust that person. I don't know why you don't trust that person. Well, if we can't trust any of these people, who are we supposed to trust? Don't trust anybody. Okay? Trust people in your personal life who you've formed relationships with of mutual trust and understanding so that there's something to balance against. And then if that person violates your trust, you stop trusting them. The TV characters have violated our trust over and over and over again, and people are still looking for different TV characters to trust. It's crazy. Don't trust anyone. That aside, let's get back to the substance here. The idea that Trump had steered Israel away from attacking Iran when we heard about the run-up to Israel needing to go in and take out Iran's nuclear facilities, and Trump shot that down. Not in so many words. He said he didn't give them a warning, but he did let them know that it would not be appropriate for them to take military action at that time. And Trump's word played because we haven't seen that action. And Trump was very respectful and polite about the fact that there's another party over there with an interest in what happens, but that they're not going to be allowed to run the show. He's made that quite clear. Is Trump then under Israel's thumb? He's the servant of Benjamin Netanyahu, for instance, or anyone in the pro-Israel camp, any Zionist whatsoever? Doesn't really make a lot of sense if he's not doing something that all of the other Zionists want them to do. And we went through Mark Levin and some of the other lunatics last week. But there's one other part, and I think it was a little bit more subtle, and maybe it's worth just hearing again. But Trump talking about destroying labs, for instance, you can apply it to any sort of building, destroying them when no one was in there, making sure that no one would be in there when they were destroyed so that people weren't killed, and then them being destroyed. Well, if you are playing that out on both sides, right? If you know that you're going to attack an empty building because you want to destroy the facility, and the people in the other country, in Iran in this instance, know that you're going to attack that building with no people in it because the facility needs to be destroyed, that sounds like they have both agreed to it. Let's just hear his comments one more time.
Very strong, where we can go in with inspectors, we can take whatever we want, we can blow up whatever we want, but nobody getting killed. We can blow up a lab, but nobody's going to be in the lab, as opposed to everybody being in the lab and blowing it up, right? Two ways of doing it. Yeah, I told him this would be inappropriate to do right now because we're very close to a solution.
All right. So can we apply that more broadly to situations beyond this one? I think the answer is obviously yes. There could be an understanding between Trump and the leader of another country that something in that country has to be destroyed, probably because it's a regime asset and it's the cause of some danger in the situation, and therefore it must be destroyed. So Trump has an arrangement. They know that it's going to be destroyed at a certain time. People are moved out so that no one is harmed by it. And assuming all that takes place and goes off without a hitch, how would it be communicated to us? I would suggest that the global propaganda media would tell us that it's an act of war that's going to lead to more war, and that we will see these acts of war consistently over time. And considering that Russia is, it's called their full-scale invasion, Putin's very brutal invasion. Russia calls it a special military operation to denazify Ukraine. Okay. So are they destroying assets in Ukraine that are regime assets that must be destroyed. And then is that being communicated to us as a war? Okay. That's what you got to think about. Same thing holds true for Israel and Gaza. All right. I know it's a genocide and all, and that there's all these people who have died, except we actually don't know that it's a genocide, and we don't know that all those people have died. According to news reports, those people have died. And because the two sides of the controlled opposition dynamic agree that the underlying reality is that those people have died, and also that paragliding go-karts flew over the most heavily secured border in the history of the world with only a year's advance warning. The controlled opposition believes both of those things. We believe that the underlying truth that these people have died and that these events happened must therefore be true. But none of that has to be true. And we should really remember that and understand that if we wanted to stop Donald Trump and Iranian actors who were aligned with our interests and coming to reasonable terms with Trump, working on behalf of the project at large, if things were destroyed, the media would tell us these are acts of war, okay? And they might not be. If both sides agree that something has to be destroyed and the call is, well, you're going to be better at destroying that than we are, and you destroying it means you know it was destroyed, and therefore we can't just tell you, oh, yes, we destroyed that thing, don't worry about it. That seems like a totally plausible framing for a lot of what we see to be happening right now. And so I would not dismiss that. And I'm not saying I know that to be true. I'm saying this is the sort of thing you keep in the back of your head, and over time you just watch and see, does this describe a reality? And I think that we have an example of that already with Trump and Iran about the attacks from the first term that were then responded to, the killing of Soleimani, I believe it was. And then the response was that an Iranian missile was going to hit near a military facility. And upon that missile hitting, the news then told us, well, okay, I mean, nobody died, but all of these soldiers have traumatic brain injury from the loud sound of the missile. Is that what happened? Trump's told the story many times. He talks about deals being made. He knows, he would describe it, he would say that he knows Iran would have to hit him back, and so they agreed on how Iran would hit him back. Because it's a lot of face saving. It's a lot of narrative stuff that has to paper over the falsity in the narrative delivered to us by the global regime's propaganda apparatus. Let us continue. So Trump made those comments on that was the other post. I think Trump made these comments, I want to say, on Wednesday. I believe it was the day before. Yeah, I think that those comments were from Wednesday, and I didn't get to them on Friday's show. That's how it went. Okay, so this came out a day later. Sorry, I just had to make sure my chronology was in place. This is just the news. One day after those comments, Israel accepts U.S. ceasefire proposal, according to the White House. Israel signed off on this proposal before it was sent to Hamas, Levitt said, the Hill news outlet reported. I can also confirm that those discussions are continuing, and we hope that a ceasefire in Gaza will take place so we can return all the hostages home. An Israeli official told CNN that the proposal includes the release of 10 living hostages and 18 deceased hostages, in addition to a 60-day ceasefire. Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu told the hostages' families earlier on Thursday that he had accepted Witkoff's proposal, according to the hostages and the Missing Families Forum. Hamas said Thursday that it was reviewing the new Witkoff proposal and was responsibly studying it in a way that serves the interests of our people, provides relief, and achieves a permanent ceasefire. So Trump is simultaneously reaching ceasefire with Israel and Gaza. At the same time, he's telling Israel they're not allowed to bomb Iran. Well, I would suggest Israel was never going to bomb Iran. And in fact, I did suggest that a while back. And if we have a bombing story in the future, it's probably going to fit the framing I just described. Because Trump's in control of these situations, and it doesn't matter what the neocons do. All of the warmongering is to keep the story going. And I think we're going to see another example of this in a little bit. But it keeps the story going. And as long as the story continues going, the regime keeps looking worse in their efforts. They keep looking more corrupt, more power hungry, more concerned with attempting to go to war. And all of that makes them look very bad, and more people will then reject them. Continuing. Trump addressed all of this again in his press conference with Elon Musk on Friday.
President, can you give us an update to the latest ceasefire agreement that Israel has agreed to, but Hamas still considering?
Well, they're very close to an agreement on Gaza, and we'll let you know about it during the day or maybe tomorrow, and we have a chance of that. And I think we have a chance of making a deal with Iran also. They don't want to be blown up. They would rather make a deal, and I think that could happen in the not-too-distant future. That would be a great thing if we could have a deal without bombs being dropped all over the Middle East. That would be a very good thing. They can't have a nuclear weapon. We want them to be safe. We want them to have a very, very successful nation. Let it be a great nation, but we can't have that. They cannot have a nuclear weapon. It's very simple. And I think we're fairly close to a deal with Iran.
All of that is good news. And again, nuclear power is an option. Nuclear weapons are not an option. Also, nuclear weapons just aren't an option. But let's continue. I got to say it, man. I'm not going to talk about nukes as though I believe they are real. I do not believe they are real. I understand that I might be wrong about that, but I don't believe it. And therefore, to act always as though they are real, just because I can't prove that they're not, even though there's no reason to believe that there are, can't go on like that. We can't just analyze things because we believe that the television must be telling us the truth in this instance. Okay? There's no requirement whatsoever for the TV to be telling us the truth. And also, again, our physical reality is mysterious enough that we should understand that automatically. This is from Axios today. U.S. nuclear deal offer allows Iran to enrich uranium. The nuclear deal proposal the U.S. gave Iran on Saturday would allow limited low-level uranium enrichment on Iranian soil for a to-be-determined period of time, Axios has learned, contradicting public statements from officials. White House envoy Steve Witkoff and Secretary of State Marco Rubio have said publicly that the U.S. will not allow Iran to enrich uranium and will demand the full dismantlement of Iran's nuclear facilities. The secret proposal shows far more flexibility on both points. Iran has consistently said it won't sign any deal that bans enrichment for civilian purposes, a red line that is irreconcilable with the U.S. public posture. Well, it's not irreconcilable with Donald Trump's public posture, which, as much as they attempt to reframe it, and as much as the neocons and the warmongers in the GOP establishment, and some of them in and around Trump's administration, reiterate it, it's about nuclear weapons. It's not about no enrichment. The proposal described to Axios by two sources with direct knowledge, one of whom provided a point-by-point breakdown, would seem to offer a clearer path to a deal. By making this offer, the Trump administration is risking backlash from its allies on the Hill and in Israel. Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu's government and dozens of Republican senators have pushed the administration to maintain red lines on zero nuclear enrichment and the full dismantlement of Iran's nuclear program. And we talked about that briefly the other day. We discussed Ron DeSantis in his pro-Israel speech and his pro-Israel remarks, totally contradicting the viewpoint of the Trump administration, going along with the viewpoint of these dozens of Republican senators and Israel's government, though I don't believe Netanyahu, who I believe to be totally boxed in and controlled in one way or another. Not saying he's a good guy, just saying he's under control. He's, to the extent that we have properly, historically, assessed Netanyahu as an evil tool of the Zionist regime in the proxy state of Israel. to the extent that all of that was proper. He is not doing that now. And the people who want to do those things have been trying to remove him from office for years unsuccessfully. And we know that elections are fake. And we know that these same stories are playing out all over the world. So in that case, you have to say, okay, maybe Netanyahu was always evil. Maybe it's a clone and a double and a robotic engineered, mindless, soulless entity. Could be, right? He could be exactly the same thing as Joe Biden. But regardless, he's not working on behalf of those people. To the extent he's doing anything that might be on behalf of those people, it's backfiring, it's blowing up in his face, and it's making the whole project look worse. This is it. President Trump made it clear that Iran can never obtain a nuclear bomb. Special Envoy Witkoff has sent a detailed and acceptable proposal to the Iranian regime, and it's in their best interest to accept it. Out of respect for the ongoing deal, the administration will not comment on details of the proposal to the media. That was from Press Secretary Caroline Leavitt. Sacred JM in the chat, $5. I'll send you a nuke. Well, I guess then I will take my chances. Thanks for the $5. Don't send me a nuke. All right, so it sounds like we have deals happening with Israel and Gaza and a deal happening with the U.S. and Iran, and Israel has accepted the terms of both of those agreements. But our warmongers, our establishment GOP, and those who've been trying to eliminate Netanyahu from the Israeli government for the last few years are not happy with that. So the regime is not getting what it wants in Israel. It's like number one place, besides maybe the United States. And it's not getting what it wants vis-a-vis Iran. And those are supposed to be our biggest, baddest enemies, besides Russia and China. Iran's maybe on that kind of, they're 1A, and Iran and North Korea are 1B. It's not working out. Is it going to work out in other places? For some reason, we are still inclined to believe in the reality of other situations that, do not seem to be real. I'm trying to determine whether we just jump straight to Russia. Let's jump straight to Russia and we'll hit Poland at the end. Editing on the fly, everybody. So, where are we here? Not that one. I edited on the fly, but not quite enough. Now we're all set. Okay, so over the weekend, Lindsey Graham, one of those career-long GOP establishment neocon warmongers, a man who went to Ukraine in 2014 with John McCain and I believe Amy Klobuchar to meet with Ukrainian Nazis in the process of directing the overthrow of Ukraine, which did happen. He went to Ukraine just this weekend. Here is Lindsey Graham and the man known as Da Nang Dick, Richard Blumenthal, visiting with the comedic actor in Ukraine.
Good to see you. Welcome. Good to see you. Good to see you. Good to see you. Thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you for coming. Thank you for having us. We're back. No, we're back. Happy to see you. 7-3.
Mr. President,
Good to see you. It's good to come, especially now in such challenging period. Thank you, Press.
Oh, it's so silly. Thank you, Press. You can leave now. We're talking behind closed doors. You've seen that it looks like we're having a very important meeting. Here's a guy in his army fatigues. That means that this is high-level military stuff. It's all a clown show. But Lindsey Graham went over to monger for more war. And this is how The Hill describes their meeting. Graham Blumenthal meet with Zelensky in Ukraine. The three leaders discussed a legislative initiative to strengthen U.S. sanctions against Russia and ongoing peace negotiations, according to Zelensky's office. And of course, they have to say that because if they are not going over there to discuss legislation they're creating here, then the government doesn't pay for their trips. So apparently they spent like $1 million getting over there in terms of security, a chartered jet, and the rest of it. But leaving that aside, it has to be attached to legislation. Otherwise, senators shouldn't be flying around the world attempting to conduct American foreign policy unless they are doing so at the instruction of the president. And who knows, maybe behind the scenes, Donald Trump did tell the two of them to go and talk to Zelensky. I don't know that part. We can't know that part. But the legislative initiative is useless, and that's the purpose of this trip, ostensibly. Ukraine's fight is our fight. Our national security is at stake because Vladimir Putin will keep going, and his aggression will continue, not just against Ukraine, but against our allies, and we will be obligated by our treaty to put troops on the ground. And he's talking about the NATO treaty. Again, all of this is ridiculous. That was Richard Blumenthal. Now is the time to stop Putin, he says. Now is the time to support Ukraine, and I'm inspired by the continuing bravery and strength of the Ukrainian people. What in the heck just happened on my page? Where are we? There we are. Sorry, I lost my place. Something loaded and then disappeared. The whole thing was blown up in my face. In response to over 3 years long war, Graham has pushed ahead a bill in the upper chamber seeking to increase sanctions on Russia in an effort to tame their aggression in Eastern Europe. And he has 82 co-sponsors of that. But they're going to wait to put it on the floor and bring it to a vote until President Trump approves of harsher measures. And of course, the president is the person who is tasked with dealing with America's foreign policy. The Senate is and should be irrelevant here. So, Lindsey Graham goes to Ukraine, and a day later, we get this. This is how the Financial Times describes the events of this weekend. Ukraine stages audacious attack on airfields deep in Russian territory. So we just heard a couple weeks ago, or maybe it was last week, not too long ago, that the 3 weeks in office new German chancellor, along with Sir Keir Starmer and Emmanuel Macron, who just got manhandled by his male wife last week, those guys, in addition to the U.S., told Ukraine that they could strike targets deep inside Russia. It hasn't happened for well over 3 years, almost 3.5 years of this quote-unquote war. But now it's happening right at the end, while they're having peace negotiations, which they had today in Istanbul. And we'll get to that in just a second. I want to make sure that I am up on my notes here so that I do not here we are. So I do not miss anything important. Let's go to the article in the Financial Times, the mouthpiece of the global regime's elite. Ukraine's forces launched a massive drone attack on 4 airfields deep inside Russia that were home to strategic bombers used in air raids, officials said on Sunday. Impossibly their most audacious attack of the war. The strikes hit 41 Russian aircraft in the 4 bases. Ukraine's security service said on Monday. The head of the country's Counter-Disinformation Center, a government communications agency, said that at least 13 of the planes were destroyed. So Ukraine has a counter-disinformation agency. And the Financial Times, the mouthpiece of the global media's propaganda apparatus, this is the global regime elite, one of their outlets. They're citing a counter-disinformation center for the results of this attack, the story about the results of this attack. Ukraine's security service, the SBU, is Ukraine's intelligence service and security service a reliable source? Video footage filmed by a Ukrainian reconnaissance aircraft and shared by the official appeared to show one Coming up on 3 hours, I just lose the ability to speak. To show one Russian airfield in flames and drones attacking several planes. In another video, Vasyl Malyuk, head of the Security Service of Ukraine, the SBU, is heard approving the attacks. In a message on X, President Volodymyr Zelensky said he had met Malyuk to congratulate him on an absolutely brilliant result for an operation that had taken 1 year, 6 months, and 9 days from the start of planning to effective execution. The people involved in preparing the operation had been withdrawn from Russia ahead of Sunday's attacks, he added. The massive coordinated attack by the SBU came as Zelensky said he would dispatch a team of negotiators to Istanbul for another round of peace talks. The SBU said Zelensky personally supervised the progress of the operation. A total of 117 drones were used in the attack, the president said. The SBU smuggled the drones into Russia, followed later by small wooden mobile cabins. The people said the drones were concealed under the roofs of the structures, which had been loaded onto lorries, truck beds. On Sunday, the roofs were remotely opened and the drones launched towards Russian military airfields. This is exactly what we need to win the war, which is an asymmetric conflict. Military creativity like that, said Oleksandr Merezhko, head of the Ukrainian Parliament's Foreign Affairs Committee. A former Ukrainian officer who runs analytical group Front Intelligence Insight said that while the damage would probably not directly influence Russia's position on the battlefield, it was still significant. How can it be significant if it doesn't substantially change Russia's position on the battlefield and does not at all change their terms of negotiation and the purpose of the operation? This stuff is so silly. This expert says it does reduce Russia's strategic capabilities, which means the ability to project power globally, the ability to deliver nuclear strikes, and overall military posture in Eurasia, he said. When the Russian general staff plans wars, they don't look at just one theater of war or specific part of the front line. They assess the military capabilities and project how to execute the political will of leadership. Ukraine's attack would dent Russia's geopolitical confidence, he added. There was one other thing that I wanted to think. Where are we? Okay. So, by the way, the attack supposedly caused more than $7 billion worth of damage. That sounds ridiculous. A, I don't believe that they could know it, and B, $7 billion. A senior Ukrainian official said Kyiv expects Moscow to present extreme demands that it could not agree to, because if implemented, it would mean the end of Ukraine as a sovereign nation. Ukraine's not really a sovereign nation. Ukraine's a proxy state. Now it's a much smaller proxy state. The proposal seen by the Financial Times on Sunday, the Ukrainian negotiators allowed the Financial Times to see their proposal to Russia before submitting their proposal to Russia. Does that make sense? Where is the Financial Times getting such extraordinary access? We will leave that article for now. Take a little break and come right back to Russia, Ukraine. But first, a word from our good friends at Rumble. Still haven't tried 1775 coffee? Now's your shot. The 1775 starter kit just dropped. Only 1,000 units. You're getting the bold dark roast that hits harder than a CNN fact check. The smooth medium roast and the Vitality Mushroom Coffee for clean energy and laser focus, no crash. All single origin, small batch, toxin free and mold free. Plus you're also getting a gold spoon clip because freedom isn't scooped with plastic. A frother strong enough to stir up your coffee and your mother-in-law's political opinions. And a black 1775 tumbler that says, I don't take life advice or caffeine from a woke sea witch. $170 worth of coffee and gear, yours for $99. This is for the ones who've been watching 1775 blow up on Rumble, wondering if it's actually worth it. Spoiler alert, it is. Go to 1775coffee.com/studio and grab your starter kit before they're gone. Bold beans, clean fuel, and a morning routine that stands for something just like Rumble does. Start your day with coffee that actually backs what you believe. All righty then. Now we are back. Let us continue with Russia and Ukraine. The Daily Mail today described this attack, yesterday described this attack in all of its important drama. How Zelensky's men plotted Operation Spider's Web, that blew $7 billion hole in Putin's irreplaceable nuke bomber fleet. Experts praise genius attack, but warn of violent response from humiliated Kremlin. Man, that's so weird. They're basically denuclearizing Russia. Wow. That's the thing that Donald Trump said Russia and China had agreed to in his first term, that they were going to denuclearize. So is Russia destroyed because they've been denuclearized? What are we dealing with here? I would suggest that we are dealing with something that fits the framing I described earlier. There was one thing in this. The attack was carried out 29 years to the day after Ukraine handed over dozens of the same strategic bombers to Russia, along with up to 2,000 strategic nuclear warheads and 176 ICBMs in exchange for a promise not to be attacked under the Budapest Memorandum. How about that? Celebrating an anniversary, a significant date. That was the date Ukraine was denuclearized, and now Russia's being denuclearized. Same date. How does it happen? Gosh, that's amazing. I bet it was a major act of war, the most audacious attack we've ever seen. And we'll just go on believing these things till the end of days, because we can't let go. We can't let go to the idea that they are telling us the truth, at least on some level. And maybe they are. It's just a level far below these quote unquote acts of war. Oh, I know there's video evidence. Okay. There's video evidence of the ghost of Kyiv too. There's video evidence of all sorts of things. And that video evidence does not have to be attached in any way to any reality prime, any aspect of reality prime, much less the specific one they're describing. It doesn't have to be part of reality prime at all. It could be entirely generated by the machine for propaganda purposes. And I would suggest that perhaps that's exactly what's happening. The New York Post lets us know that Ukraine did not give Trump advance notice before obliterating Russian doomsday nuclear bombers, according to, quote unquote, reports. The daring Ukrainian operation had been in the works for more than a year and entailed a covert operation to smuggle a slew of drones into Russia. But the White House was not given a heads up that the planned attack was coming. CBS and Axios said, citing sources. The White House did not respond to a post request for comment on Sunday. Wow. They went over Trump's head. And look at this video. This is what shows what happened. You can tell because it's crazy blurry. You've never seen any of those buildings before, but whoa. That must be coming from a bomb that landed. And therefore, the entire thing is true. So it was a sneak attack. Donald Trump had no warning. But yet, Donald Trump is the crucial player in the Ukraine and Russia negotiations. He's the middleman. He's the peacemaker. He's the king of the world, ultimately. He's got more than enough influence to determine the outcomes of these situations. But Ukraine is striking without Trump's permission. Is that believable? I would suggest to you that it's not. Now, in the instance that there was a real attack, that there was an actual event to some extent, could it have been regime terrorism? Yes, of course it could have been that. and a regime intelligence agency with military capabilities could be that, okay? And the SBU, that would make sense. Could they stage terrorist attacks in other countries? Of course they could. We've seen them do it in Russia already, bombing bridges and the like, to the extent that all that's real, okay? So, terrorist attacks inside Russia, possible. Nation state level attack by Ukraine, give me a break. And Zelensky is selling it pretty hard, so good for him. Believe it if you want. Everybody's going to have different places they come down on this stuff. I know it gets tough, and you don't want to seem unserious in our view of these things, but we're in the middle of denuclearization worldwide. We're in the middle of negotiations on Iran, Israel, Gaza, Israel, and Russia, Ukraine. And at the same time, we're really going to believe that these sides are still striking each other in their most audacious attacks of the entire campaign. I know Russia hit Kyiv last week, and this is the response. Sure it is. And the response to that just happened to fall on the same day as the 29-year anniversary, and one day after Lindsey Graham, one of the biggest warmongers in all of America, goes to Ukraine. Come on. Okay. Zelensky, in the lead-ups to the negotiations, very tough.
Together with America has better weapons than Russia. We also have stronger tactical solutions. Our Operation Spiderweb yesterday proved that. Russia must feel what its losses mean. That is what will push it toward diplomacy. And when Russia takes losses in this war, it's obvious to everyone that Ukraine is the one holding the line, not just for itself, but for all of Europe. We must do everything to make sure diplomacy is not empty. Our delegation is now in Istanbul, and we are ready to take the necessary steps for peace. Naturally, the starting point should be a ceasefire and humanitarian actions, the release of prisoners, and the return of abducted children.
So they want all of that, and then they can get down to the brass tacks of the negotiations. These are the negotiations for the ceasefire that will lead to the negotiations for later. EC in the chat said, what's the basis for the claim that Putin wants to invade any other part of Europe? It's a very good question. I don't believe there is any basis for that claim, except if you want to continue believing that the Cold War was all real as described. I, for one, do not believe that. This is Axios. Russia submits usual demands for peace in Ukraine talks. And we don't have to go through this because we've gone through it a number of times. This is from today. Russia presented Ukraine with a peace memo on Monday stating its terms for a ceasefire and peace deal, though the Russian position effectively remains unchanged. Right? So they have the stuff about the POWs and the hostages and bodies being returned, ceasefire and the rest of it. But the priorities were always no Ukraine in the EU, no Ukraine in NATO. The Donbass republics are allowed to remain independent. And since then, they've actually voted in referenda to become part of Russia. So we'll see how that goes. But all of those territories are going to remain independent, and Ukraine will be demilitarized and denazified. Those are the terms at the beginning. Those are the terms before the very brutal invasion, which was not a very brutal invasion. It was just a conflict that was already happening. And then Russia went in to denazify, maybe to clean up the conflict. I have a feeling it was probably generally over by then, but, who knows? Maybe there was a reaction by the regime, whatever. Maybe it was just go time. Maybe the end of the process had to be accomplished, and we saw this massive narrative to make all of us hate Russia. Failed. It failed. Okay? So Russia's terms haven't changed. Russia's battlefield position hasn't changed. At no time have they ever lost any territory. At no time did Ukraine ever have any hope of winning. Okay? Ukraine's big spring-summer counteroffensive from 2023 that we heard about all that time, the plans were leaked online by 21-year-old National Guardsmen. And then they still had it. Oh, it's going to be a summer offensive. Oh, it's going to be a summer-fall offensive. Where was the counteroffensive? It was nowhere. They gained back no ground. Ukraine has made no progress on any level the entire time. So why would Russia's demands have changed? Of course, they didn't. And that is the updated scenario that we have right now. They still haven't changed. Here is more of the comedic actor in Ukraine reacting to the peace talks today.
In Istanbul, just ended, and I'm waiting for the Minister of Mayor full report. They exchanged documents through the Turkish side, and we are preparing a new release of prisoners of the war. Today, we see the situation clearly. If Russia turns the Istanbul meeting into an empty talk, there must be a new level of pressure, new sanctions, and not just from Europe. We need to work on joint sanctions at the G7 level, including with the United States and with everyone in the world who wants peace. It's very, very important that each of our partners supports this exact approach.
It's very, very important that each of their partners supports this exact approach. Okay? That exact approach is totally contradictory to Russia's terms to end this thing. Therefore, that exact approach will just perpetuate the war. It'll keep the thing going. It'll keep the story going. Zelensky is delivering narrative momentum to the war continuing. Donald Trump is not going to agree with Volodymyr Zelensky's terms. And even if the outside chance existed that he would in a real way, it wouldn't matter because there's the Russian side that is going to have the ultimate and final say on this. And maybe there's some combination of Russia and the United States working together or some of these other countries. But it's not like unilaterally the United States is just going to get on board with Ukraine's European allies and do what Ukraine wants now, after 3.5 years with Trump at the helm. That's impossible. So we don't even need to consider that a possibility. And then you have to wonder what else is going on. This is Umarov, who Zelensky just mentioned.
Proposal is an unconditional ceasefire in the air.
Gosh, he speaks pretty clear English, doesn't he? Thank goodness all of these people are reading these statements in English so that we can hear them. I mean, we're the people who have to support the Ukrainian side, right? So you better talk to us directly in English so we know what you're saying. Thanks, guy. You're probably not part of the intelligence apparatus in Ukraine that was set up by the CIA.
Sea and land, at least for 30 days. This position has remained unchanged for the 3 months, and we consider it the basis for starting a peaceful resolution. On release of prisoners of war, we agreed to focus on specific categories rather than numbers. We agreed to exchange all for all, seriously wounded and seriously sick prisoners of war. Second category is young soldiers who are from 18 to 25 years old, all for all. Also, we agreed to return 6,000 to 6,000 bodies of fallen soldiers. We have provided the other side with a list of several hundred Ukrainian children who were deported to Russia. This matter is a fundamental priority for us. If Russia is genuinely committed to the peace process, the return of at least half of the children from this list would be serving as a positive indication.
So those are peaceful terms there. It's not going to get you all the way there. Maybe it gets you to the ceasefire point. It's good that they're exchanging these people or whatever. Let's continue. This is the Russian side's reaction to the negotiations today. This is the Russian envoy Medinsky. So Umarov, who we just saw, was leading the negotiations on the the Ukrainian side. I mean, it's just European Israel. So it's kind of the same thing. It's actually OG Israel, if you really think about it. But here we are. Well, not OG Israel. I just mean the origin of the proxy state of Israel. You get it. Here we go. This is Medinsky.
Which are on storage with us. We've conducted all possible identification procedures. And we have organized special transport. And those bodies will be transferred to the Ukrainian side next week so that they can give them a decent burial. I don't know if there are any bodies that they want to give to us. We would accept them, but that is yet unknown. We have also agreed on the most large-scale prisoner exchange. Those who are gravely wounded or gravely ill. That will be a humanitarian gesture on our side. A similar all-for-all formula will be used to exchange young soldiers of a given age. And it will be at least 1,000 from each side. And it could be more. These numbers are now being coordinated.
So very much along the same lines as Umarov, here is president of the NATO country of Turkey, Erdogan, presenting himself as the eventual peacemaker. And I think this is very interesting because Erdogan, to the extent that he is not fully aligned with the NATO effort, has been a thorn in the side of the regime, it seems to me. And he's a little bit of a wild card as far as I'm concerned. But I think that this is very interesting. Take a look.
Sayın Vladimir Putin'i, gerekse Zelenski'yi,
Man.
Vladimir Putin'i,
I forgot that this was, I'm going to turn this down and try to read along with it. And hopefully this will be productive. But he's saying Vladimir Putin and Volodymyr Zelensky in Istanbul or Ankara, and even Mr. Trump to be with them. And if they accept, I would like to come together with them in this meeting. And thus, let's turn Istanbul into a peace center. We will take steps toward this after this last meeting. So, very interesting. He wants Zelensky, Putin, and Trump to come to Istanbul or Ankara and get all of this settled. That sounds very plausible if you ask me. That sounds like we're getting the preview to what the final scene of all this is going to be. And it makes complete and total sense that it's in a NATO country. And Turkey's a very large, very powerful country with trade routes all over, okay? A society with a deep history. Like that's a powerful negotiating counterpart, right? The deal's not going to be signed in France or Germany or the UK. It's not going to be signed in Kyiv either, I would doubt. Although that would be very appropriate if the Russian side took back all of Ukraine and the deal was signed in Kyiv. Are we going to get that far? I don't know about that. But I could see this happening. So Erdogan as a peacemaker, Erdogan being seen as a peacemaker would change his public image across the West, I would think, and give him some defense from whatever the regime, NATO coalition, or whatever goes after him and tries to make him look bad, as they do when leaders fail to align with the agenda in significant ways. All right, so let's switch quickly. One last subject, and then we will get on out of here. The Polish election. I talked about that at the beginning, and I'm going to make it all the way through. We're going to get it. So let's start here. This is from Wojciech Palachek. I'm hoping I am saying his name correctly, but this is from X, formerly Twitter, last week on the 28th, so in the lead up to the election. And he says, Chairman of the U.S. House Foreign Affairs Committee, Congressman Brian Mast, demands explanations from the European Commission regarding possible foreign financing of globalist Rafal Trzaskowski's presidential campaign. And I probably pronounced that wrong again. Congressman Mast expects the European Commission, led by Ursula von der Leyen, a known supporter of the globalist Prime Minister of Poland, Donald Tusk, to address the growing concerns about the financing of the Polish electoral campaign. During the 2025 Polish presidential online profiles, I guess that means he means the presidential election, the first round. Online profiles have emerged attacking right-wing presidential candidates Karol Nawrocki and Sławomir Mencen, while simultaneously posting content supportive of the globalist candidate Rafał Trzaskowski. Despite having only a few dozen followers, these pages reportedly spent large sums, tens of thousands of Polish zloty, on smear campaigns across social media platforms. So that's quite impressive right there, because we've seen this kind of bot interference in political issues in the United States and elsewhere. So it's no surprise that's happening, again, always on behalf of the regime. Questions from the American side include, who funded the advertisements promoting Trzaskowski while attacking Nawrocki and Mencen? What role was played by the company Stratos and its shareholder linked to the Democrat Party? And what specifically does the European Commission intend to do about it? The congressman expects European institutions to thoroughly investigate the matter, particularly whether the financing of such activities is tied to funds associated with George Soros. Trzaskowski has met with Alex Soros many times in the past. We showed that a couple weeks ago. During the last presidential debate, Trzaskowski clearly said he would prefer Soros to Orban, but denied the accusations of foreign financing. He would prefer Soros to Orban. What kind of person prefers Soros to Orban? Someone who is fully in the regime camp and no one else. That is ridiculous. But good for him for saying it out loud. So here we have the result. This is an Associated Press article reprinted in the New York Post, and I think the Post might have changed the headline. Trump-backed candidate Karol Nawrocki wins Poland's presidential election. And pardon me, I just want to get the notes from here because my highlights, as you might guess, are gone. Here we go. Let's skip down a bit. The outcome suggests that Poland can be expected to take a more populist and nationalist path under its new president, who was backed by U.S. President Donald Trump. Trzaskowski conceded defeat and congratulated Nawrocki on Monday, thanking all those who voted for him. I fought for us to build a strong, safe, honest, and empathetic Poland together, he wrote on X. I'm sorry I wasn't able to convince the majority of citizens of my vision for Poland. I'm sorry we didn't win together. Yes, I'm sure that they are absolutely devastated by your inability to get a majority of the Polish electorate in your fake election. And it was 51-49 Nawrocki. I mean, elections are rigged, probably in both directions. And that probably at this point has to include the good guys rigging elections in one direction as well. There's got to be a way out of it. If that's the way, okay. It's not the sort of thing that we just want to get behind, but we are well beyond the belief that parties with this level of power over issues this important are going to turn to voters. Prime Minister Donald Tusk, skipping down, came to power in late 2023 with a coalition government that spans a broad ideological divide. So broad that it hasn't been able to fulfill certain of his electoral promises, such as loosening the restrictive abortion law or passing a civil partnership law for same-sex couples. But Duda's veto power has been another obstacle. It has prevented Tusk from fulfilling promises to reverse laws that politicize the court system in a way that the EU found to be undemocratic. Now it appears that Tusk will have no way to fulfill those promises, which he made both to voters and the EU. So Tusk, on behalf of the regime, has made all of these promises to Polish voters. He can't fulfill any of them because he was stopped by Duda in Duda's term, and now he's going to be stopped by Nawrocki. He's never going to get what he wants. The regime is never going to get what they want. The legislation is never going to be passed. And so you see the sovereign nationalist side controlling the points of power that they must control in order to thwart the regime. And we haven't gotten to a point where real elections are happening in this country or any other. We haven't gotten to the point where voters are deciding, I mean, maybe in Venezuela, 81% of them are deciding that, yes, they want that leader. Maybe one day we'll get to that point. If we had real elections, we could get to that point very quickly. Or if there were some other indirect proof of that, that would be fine. But the regime is now failing in Poland. That was one of their big projects. Poland is a Russian neighbor, a Ukrainian neighbor, and I think the sixth largest economy in Europe. That's a big deal. And so let's go here. Back to the Financial Times, the regime's elite mouthpiece. Poland's new president puts EU billions and trade goals at risk. Oh no. Poland's lurch to the right has imperiled the EU's trade ambitions and cast into doubt billions of euros in funds earmarked for Warsaw, officials said, while boosting a growing Eurosceptic trend in Central Europe. The victory of right-wing nationalist Karol Nawrocki in Poland's presidential election has shocked Brussels, which fears that it will fatally wound the country's pro-EU government under Premier Donald Tusk, stymie reforms required to access EU funds, and prompt Warsaw to help block a landmark trade deal with the South American Mercosur countries. And let me just ask the machine really quickly. I should have done this morning. Sorry, hold for processing. So which are the Mercosur countries in South America? They are Argentina, Brazil, Paraguay, and Uruguay. Venezuela is technically a full member, but has been suspended since 2016. And associate members are Bolivia, in process of becoming a full member, Chile, Peru, Colombia, Ecuador, Guyana, and Suriname. And Guyana will eventually probably just be Venezuela, if you ask me. So a big chunk of South America, they want this trade deal to go through, and now it might not go through because the regime doesn't have their people there. Nawrocki, a former football hooligan with no political experience, campaigned under a slogan of Poland first and criticized EU policies on climate change, Ukraine, and social issues. Brussels said the previous government, skipping down, led by the right-wing Law and Justice Party, which nominated Nawrocki, endangered rule of law and independence of the country's judiciary, resulting in the freezing of billions in EU funds. And so again, we can see a parallel situation. We're being told Trump is endangering the rule of law. He's endangering the independence of the country's judiciary, and he's going to try to override them. Okay? And in response, the global regime is going to stop flooding money into the United States to the extent that they're able. And global philanthropists, you would then see pulling back. Following a commitment from Tusk's government to carry out reforms that would strengthen the independence of the judiciary, the European Commission in 2024 unlocked 137 billion euros of EU funds earmarked for Poland. Brussels has to date dispersed more than 20 billion of Poland's $60 billion share of the EU's post-pandemic recovery fund, as well as close to $7 billion, or 7 billion euros, out of 76.5 billion in regular EU regional funds on the proviso of changes such as amending a controversial disciplinary regime for judges and reinstating all judges that were subject to disciplinary measures under the previous government. However, these changes were not signed into law due to outgoing President Andrzej Duda vetoes, something his successor has vowed to continue. So the EU is withholding funds that were already appropriated to go to Poland because they want certain political measures and steps to be taken before they release that money. Isn't it funny that the same people thinking that that is good policy think it's terrible that Donald Trump might stop the federal government agencies under his oversight from spending money appropriated by Congress? So weird. They can hold it back when they want to hold it back. When their needs are not being met, they can withdraw the funds. But when Trump does it, he's an autocrat, an authoritarian, and a dictator. A couple more sections from this article, then one other quick note, and we are out of here. He urged the commission to take action if the reforms were not passed. The first step would be to put pressure on the Polish government to implement the necessary measures, he said. And this being this guy, Daniel Freund, a Green member of the European Parliament. The first step would be to put pressure on the Polish government to implement the necessary measures. The moment the president takes real action and doesn't sign them, the second step would be to freeze the funds. So they're getting pretty aggressive about it. Don't they have some kind of deal? Isn't Poland part of the EU? They have to have certain political outcomes that the rest of the EU agrees to in order for Poland to receive the money as part of the EU. So they don't actually want Poland to be a sovereign nation. And this is an indication, by the way, that those other countries who don't have this problem are going along with the EU's political agenda and thereby receiving the funds. So none of those countries are sovereign nations. That's what that would mean. Polish farmers fear, let's do this whole paragraph. In addition to Nawrocki's veto ability, his election will severely weaken Tusk's power. He doesn't really have any. And is expected to force him to avoid potentially unpopular policies, such as supporting the Mercosur trade deal. Potentially unpopular policies. Why is the Democratic leader, that's what they define Tusk as, he is Poland's leader of our democracy. They put this government in place. They put Tusk in place. Why is the Democratic leader trying to usher in unpopular policies that the country doesn't want? Isn't that wild? What happened to democracy? Polish farmers fear that cheaper food imports from South America will damage competition and lower safety standards in the EU. The Polish Farmers' Party is in Tusk's coalition. Skipping down further, officials and analysts, here we are. This election outcome will likely mean that none of the Tusk government's central projects can be implemented and undermine pro-European and democratic Poland, said René Rapasi, a German SPD member of the European Parliament. It's always the European Parliament who they're asking for feedback. Why aren't they ever concerned with what the Polish people think? It's so strange. Let's go to one of our regime mouthpiece experts in Europe. He'll tell us the thing we need to quote in the Financial Times. This will now make it difficult for the Tusk government to reconstruct the rule of law in this important EU member state. So the rule of law is going to be totally gone. And instead, popular policies will be ushered in. Why would a country have laws that aren't popular and policies that aren't popular? I thought it was government of, by, and for the people. I thought we were in our democracy. And therefore, the people's needs must be seen to. But that's not what we're in at all. Okay, one more. The Associated Press this afternoon. Trump-backed Karol Nawrocki wins Poland's presidential race. And where are we here? Apologies. Hold on. Hold for processing. Am I missing one of my... No, maybe they just changed the headline or something. But anyhow, gosh, I'm totally blowing it right now. Geez, man, I think I just grabbed the wrong link. I must have grabbed the wrong link. Pardon, 1 second. Let me find this. I have to cap this off properly. All right. Well, perhaps I have blown it and not grabbed for myself the correct link. But the news today is that Donald Tusk is going to be seeking a vote of confidence in the Polish parliament, which means that the members of the Polish parliament, the government body that the regime has controlled to some substantial degree over the years and that they set up in the first place, those people are going to vote to see whether or not Donald Tusk can remain in his position as prime minister. And the idea then is to present Tusk as having a mandate to govern, hence popularity, which means that Naraki would be the bad guy again for vetoing Tusk's very popular policies, just like Duda was. And that's how they will present it to the rest of the world. And if you believe that sort of thing, you need your head examined. All right. With that, I'm going to check the chat quickly. We're going to get one more quick Rumble ad in, and then we're going to get on out of here. Let's do first things first. If you're looking for a great place online for news, discussion, and entertainment, then check out Truth Social, Donald Trump's social media website. You'll get breaking news stories and commentary from top media figures. If you want to see Trump's legendary Truth Social posts, then get on Truth Social today. Join a growing community of patriots on a free speech platform designed to avoid censorship and cancellation by big tech. Make your voice heard. Join the movement. Join Truth Social. And, of course, I am over there as well. You can follow me at I'm Your Moderator. The Telegram stream, by the way, is t.me/veryreasonable. And I am beginning to kind of gravitate more toward Substack these days than I was prior. I guess my time between Truth Social and Substack is kind of even at this point. Substack Notes seems to be increasing in popularity, and it's a very, very normie space, and a space where everybody thinks they're a very serious intellectual. And so it's like all the worst qualities of Twitter combined. So I don't know how that's going to go, but we shall see. That said, there are also really awesome people on there, and I was able through that platform to get in touch with Konstantin von Hofmeister, who's going to be my guest on Wednesday afternoon. That'll be shown here and on Badlands. I am checking the chat. Everybody out there seems to be good. And so with that, I will be back on Wednesday for that interview, 3 p.m. Eastern. Same reasonable time, same reasonable podcast network. I don't have a network. Masks and lockdowns don't work. They lied to you about a pandemic. And Joe Biden was never president.
Well,
what?
You know who I am, don't you?
Well, you ain't Fiona Apple, and if you ain't Fiona Apple, I don't give a rat's ass.
What's wrong with being an angry prophet denouncing the hypocrisies of our times? What do you think, Max?
Do you want to be an angry prophet denouncing the hypocrisies of our times?
Yeah, I think I'd like to be an angry prophet denouncing the hypocrisies of our times.
It's not true. It's more true than I would perhaps prefer.
Can we stop this cruel game and allow the boy to keep one shred of dignity? For God's sakes, I can't stand to see him in all this pain. You vicious bastards! Let him move in with you. Is it so bad to see somebody happy? So just let him move in. For the love of God, let the boy move in with you. Good Lord.
And I will not let you down.
We do a little trolling. It's called We Do a Little Trolling.
What? In my mind, that's the end game.
If you're listening for free and would like to support the show, the best way to do that is by signing up for a paid subscription at imyourmoderator.substack.com. You can find the info stream over on Telegram at t.me/veryreasonable. The merch site is cancelcouture.com, and for all my other links, you can visit linktree.com/imyourmoderator. And I'll see you soon. Down on the range.